want from Final Fantasy, because I think we've been having the wrong discussion, right? I think that Final Fantasy in general has been having the wrong discussion. I think that Final Fantasy fans, we've been having the discussion. We've been having the discussion. What is Final Fantasy? But I think actually a better discussion to have is what do we want from Final Fantasy, right? I think that's a much better discussion to have. If Final Fantasy can be anything, like anything at all, then at some point, I think it becomes almost more valuable to then discuss what are we trying to get from it? What do we want from it? You know, if it can be anything, what is it that's actually going to make us happy? Because it's almost a meme at this point, that people say that you can't make Final Fantasy fans happy. To some extent, to a large extent, I really don't view that as the fans' fault necessarily, right? And the reason I don't view it necessarily as the fans' fault is because Square Enix has made a lot of different types of Final Fantasy. And as a result, they've created a lot of different sub fandoms. And each one of those sub fandoms kind of believes they're the ones that should be listened to. And the other guys probably shouldn't be listened to as much. And that's a problem, right? Because everyone is kind of valid in their own way, right? So, it's easy for people to say, oh, it's the fans' fault. But I'm like, I don't view it as the fans' fault. I view it as, the fault of whoever it was that thought that creating 20 different types of games, and allowing all of them to feel to feel perfectly valid in their own ways, and expecting anything else but conflict on, where things should go, you know. It's to be expected, is what I should say. And people who, a lot of people who kind of act like it shouldn't be expected or like it's surprising in some way. It's not surprising at all. You have dozens upon dozens of different FF games. Of course, people are going to prefer wildly different things. Of course, people are going to argue about this. If anything, that's kind of the sensible thing to do, right? Because there isn't anymore, at least, as much of a unified vision as there used to be. And this is something I talk about a lot, is that Final Fantasy 1 through 10 were at the very least all in the same genre of game. And they reused a lot of the same gameplay concept as one another. And even when Final Fantasy 3 to 4 and they switched to ATB system, the ATB system is still not radically different from the command system that came before it, right? You were still doing the same things. You were just kind of doing those things a bit differently. You were doing them, on a timer where the timer decided the actual turns rather than it being, strictly turn based, if that makes sense. And so as a result, it's not as though 1 through 10 were, this randomly different game each time. However, I do feel like that has become the narrative, right? It has become the narrative that each time Final Fantasy is just something, completely different. In some ways, that's completely true, right? Like, of course, just look at FF7, 8, 9, right? Just the PS1 trilogy alone, very different games. Very different. And I think that's awesome. That is the spirit of Final Fantasy, and I don't think we should try to change that. However, I also think that the commonality of those games, that binding element, is also what allowed Final Fantasy to thrive and innovate. I get the merit that people have about each FF game being profoundly different, right? Like, whenever you talk about it like that, like it's so different, man. Each one is like this just completely unique experience, and it appeals to this greater idea of experimentation, of being ambitious, and all these other sorts of values that we hold, right? It's very appealing in that sense. But what I view as like kind of the other side of that is the practicality of coming up with a completely different system each time, and how much harder that has gotten in the AAA space. I don't know about you guys, but I actually cannot think of another AAA developer who makes basically a completely different IP in a completely different subgenre of game each time, because that's basically what modern FF has been, right? Like Final Fantasy 13, 15, and 16 are arguably not within the same genre of game. Right? Those are all different games. And then, of course, I mean, I left 14 out of there, but obviously that one's in its own different genre of game. We can make an exception for the MMOs well enough as that makes sense. But yeah, 13, 15, 16, all different genres of game. And I don't know too many studios, again, that can essentially make a brand new IP every 6 to 7 years and it actually be good. But also, let's take a look at some of the best combat systems, some of the best battle systems that we've ever seen, right? Like, you don't get Kingdom Hearts 2 without Kingdom Hearts 1. You don't get Devil May Cry 3 without the first Devil May Cry at the very least. Um, you don't get to Elden Ring or any of the Soulsborne games, the later on ones, without the ones before it. And so when you really think about most of the battle systems that have come out and have truly been like game changing, they're typically not the first iteration of those battle systems, right? They're typically the second iteration or the third iteration or the fourth or fifth iteration, even, right? Right? Like, DMC 3 or 5 are great examples of that, right? Like, if they completely changed entirely DMC combat each time, then you wouldn't have got to what 3 or 5 are, right? Like, it wouldn't have happened. Even now we talk about Rebirth combat, but we don't talk about Remake combat because we talk about the better version. We focus on the one that was good, the one that completely nailed it, right? We don't talk about Remake because we know that Remake was the draft for Rebirth. And so this is what I mean, right? And even ATB as a system was a sort of iteration on the command style that they had before, right? Where they said, okay, essentially, in some ways, it's not that different of a system because you're still choosing commands off of a menu. But now we're adding this ATB meter here that is going to be the thing that dictates whenever a character is able to attack. And so the ATB still was an evolution of 1 through 3. And I know a lot of people love to be obtuse about the ATB system, and they like to say, "Oh, ATB is not turn-based," but everyone understood ATB as turn-based. That's been like a recent kind of invention of discourse to kind of make a point that ATB wasn't actually turn-based or whatever. But it was what people thought of like as an actual command system. So whether you want to call it turn-based or not, whatever, it's still an evolution of what the old system was. In fact, Square Enix's way of grouping these types of games together is to call them command battles. That's what they call ATB, CTB, Command Synergy of 13. They call them all command battles. So, to the viewpoint of Square, they view 1 through 13 as like one genre of, or like one umbrella genre of combat, which is command based, right? Because the combat is dictated by you choosing commands from a menu. They view Final Fantasy VII Remake Retrilogy combat also as an evolution of command based. Now, speaking of, let's talk about why, in particular, I talk about building off of Final Fantasy VII Retrilogy. There is a particular reason why I think Retrilogy is a way to go. Um, and of course, there is biases there. I do like it the most of anything that they've tried in the modern era. Just viewing it, recent mainline titles. Um, I just think that, Retrilogy does really get it right on that front. But here's the thing, right? There was a post that, let me see if I can pull it up, actually. I think that this was a really good post that Gene shared. Um, I'll pull it up for you guys. Give me 1 second. Because this, it's about Yakuza, but I think it actually relates pretty well to FF. I'm gonna have to like, I'd have to screw with my cropping, won't I? Uh, Crap. This is not what I meant to do. Can I just like... I could do that. Oh wait, hold on. Let's do it like this. And then let's give me 1 sec. I'm like the most incompetent streamer in the world. I have no idea why you guys watch me. I'm really thankful for it, but legitimately, I don't know why. Okay. If you want competent streams, go watch someone else. If you want incompetent bullshit, watch Night Sky Prince. Okay. So Gene said he had talked to RGG Studio about Like a Dragon series, and I found this to be really interesting, because I do feel like it kind of does apply to Final Fantasy because it talks about how um, many other game series are essentially a reboot each time, right? And he said, like, if you take GTA or Assassin's Creed, those companies' big marketing copy is, oh, a new city with completely new gameplay, and they almost reinvent a large portion of the game, said RGG studio director Masayoshi Yokoyama. Through an interpreter, most games these days aren't necessarily upgrades of the previous as much as they are complete reboots. RGG Studio has achieved its steady output by recycling work from previous games, including years old animation cycles that revolve around the fictional Tokyo district of Kamurocho, modeled after the real life Kabukicho area, allowing repeated use of textures of buildings and streets. Um, I could just move it up like that. Sorry. We take on an approach that built on the previous version, Yokoyama said. That comes from more of a drama or a movie type of development, linear media content. I don't think many companies are doing this with video games. I would argue it's probably only us. So I found that to be really interesting because I think it relates back to the idea of Final Fantasy and how each game is essentially a reboot. And again, I like that element about Final Fantasy. I think it's cool. Um, Hold on 1 second. Okay, there we go. I like that element of Final Fantasy. I do, especially as it pertains to story, characters, and world. However, as video games continuously get more and more expensive, it becomes harder to do, right? And now Final Fantasy games take 7, 8 years, right? Like Final Fantasy 16 actually began development in 2015. And it's funny to think too, right? Because whenever you're starting one of these projects, you start analyzing the current industry trends and you start making a game based on the industry trends that you're seeing right then and there, right? Because that's all you kind of have. It's impossible to know where the industry is going to be years from when you make the game. For example, when they were working on Concord, Concord started development in 2016. What was Game of the Year in 2016? It was Overwatch. Overwatch was Game of the Year of 2016. By the time they put out Concord, Overwatch was already dead, or not dead necessarily, but Overwatch was kind of already on the way out. So, like, no one like really talks about or cares about Overwatch in the same way that they used to, right? But it makes sense that they would try to make a game like Overwatch. And by the time they finished making their Overwatch clone, Overwatch was already no longer the trend. So that just goes to show like how long these dev cycles are. I truly think that right now the best opportunity for FF is to get a consistent formula. It's all about compromise. I think with Rebirth's combat system, they can make 15, 16, and 13 fans happy considering that all combat systems share similarities. The main issue is probably that turn-based fans in this case, which is why the community should ask SC to improve classic mode. I agree. That's actually a good point, Lifty, is that we could have a better classic mode, like a really good classic mode that actually makes the turn-based feel good. Kaiway H9, thank you for the $5 tip. They should reuse assets from the first Soldier and make a console version of that game, then sell for $20, launch it on Switch and make some of that money back. I wonder how that would actually do. Like, granted, they should have done that in the first place, but I don't think they'll even touch it again because, they'll just view it as like, what's the point? Just write off the losses, right? All those assets are still usable, right? I mean, what they were trying to do is that they were trying to use all of the re-trilogy assets as much as they possibly could. But I think if they're really trying to do that, then use them for Final Fantasy 17, right? Like use the code base for FF17, which gets into another point that I wanted to mention. So by the time they finish Final Fantasy 7 re-trilogy Part 3, right? We're going to have a fully functioning ATB-based combat system that has been nearly universally well received. We're going to have code for a fully functioning world map, and we're going to have the designs for that fully functioning world map. We're going to have code and assets for airships that are already going to work, right? So we're going to have all of these elements that are basically already done. And all you'd have to do, create new content, create new characters, create a new story. Because you can literally take Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3 and all the core FF stuff, like the airships, the combat, the world map, that type of stuff, like the code for that, the format for that is already done. So instead of taking 7 or 8 years to make Final Fantasy 17, you could do it in 3 to 4. Final Fantasy 1 through 6 did that? Yeah, bro. Yeah, I know. And it's like, but if you mention it now for whatever reason, it's taboo. It's like not the spirit of FF. But I'm like, but that's what FF did from the start. You make it sound so easy. Let me be clear. It's still not easy. Game development is never easy. But that's why you need to be smart. Final Fantasy 7 through 9 also reuses code. Yeah, exactly. Like it's not guys, none of this is stuff that FF hasn't done before, right? The problem is that FF stopped doing it. And some of the arguments I've been seeing over, the past few days have been like, well, they haven't done it in 20 years. And I'm like, well, yeah, but they've also been struggling for like 20 years. They've been struggling for 20 years. And that's not to say that good games haven't been made in those 20 years. They have, right? They definitely have. Final Fantasy 14, Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth are incredible games. Some of the best FF games ever made, really. But we also had a lot of pain. We've also had a lot of situations, where things weren't particularly great. And I think that we as gamers should encourage asset and code reuse. I think we benefit from it so much as gamers. I think the devs benefit from it. Everyone involved benefits from it. So I think we need to praise, studios like RGG that are, successfully reusing assets and code to the fullest. Blitz, hello, my guy. Square Enix isn't great at analyzing their own chins. It's quite impressive. Yeah, I know. So true, bro. Correct me if I'm wrong. What you're saying is that you want the next FF to follow 16's formula to save time rather than create a new style for 17. Um, I'm saying it should follow Re-Trilogy's uh, formula-ish because Re-Trilogy is going to have so much done by the end of part three. Things like airships, things like code for and design templates for an explorable world map, that it would be much easier for them to use the Re-Trilogy like systems as a base than it would be for them to use FF16. And to be clear here, even though obviously, for transparency, I do prefer Re-Trilogy over, say, 16. But I do think that they would have more challenges, however, if they were to use 16 as a base for 17. The reason I say that is because 16 is going to have less done than Re-Trilogy Part 3, purely by the virtue of uh, Re-Trilogy Part 3 being the third part, obviously. And so it's already going to have touched on things like airships, like the world map and all those fundamental things. Whereas 16's gameplay still needs a lot of iteration on it um, to kind of, how should I say it? 16's gameplay would need a lot more iteration before it would be on the same playing field as what Re-Trilogy already has, purely because Re-Trilogy is the third iteration of a system building on to that, right? So it just makes sense to use that. But I don't think they should throw 16's stuff away though. I do think that they should do something with it, whether it's creating a spin-off series, whether it's creating like um, some other worlds that take place in 16's world, whether that's 16.2, whether that's something else, whether that's like its own thing, using FF16 for Dissidia. That would also be interesting. Yeah, I do think that they should do something with FF16 system. But I just think that these systems in place for Re-Trilogy Part 3 are going to be just so advanced and so well refined by the time we get to the third part that using it as a base is just going to be a lot easier. And also, Unreal Engine makes things incredibly easy to recycle assets and code. and repurpose them for different things. As a result, if we're building the next Final Fantasy game on Unreal Engine, it would just be a lot easier. Now, I know a lot of you have opinions about Unreal Engine, but let me just say, it's going to be a lot easier for them to build this game on Unreal Engine, Final Fantasy 17, that is. I would rather them build Final Fantasy 17 on Unreal Engine and not have any technical issues by using their own proprietary engines anymore. Not to say that 16 really had those same issues like 13 and 15, but I just don't want Square Enix working on their own engine anymore. Bluntly speaking. Bluntly speaking. And I do think that Final Fantasy 16, like graphically, there are some advantages there over like what Rebirth has per se. But I think that like I don't think it's a controversial opinion to say that like Square Enix like working on their own engine has just been like a downward trend. It has not been like a good thing. And also them not having to work on the engine allows them to just focus on making the game because having to make your own engine does take the time, right? I do wish that they would work better at optimizing their game for Unreal. Uh, Whenever you look at certain other games, like Stellar Blade, for example, earlier this year, Stellar Blade was really well optimized for Unreal Engine. That was a great looking game. So if Square Enix could please optimize Unreal Engine a little bit better going forward, maybe switching to UE5 would help with that. I think it would be great. Even CD Projekt Red gave up their own engine. Yeah, CDPR is not going to be using the Red engine for the next Cyberpunk or for the next Witcher, right? And I think that's awesome. It sucks in some ways because they just got that engine to the point of where it's actually really good. I love the look of Cyberpunk. I love the look of, The Witcher and everything like that. But it was a smart move for CDPR to do because the whole industry really runs on Unreal Engine or Unity Engine now, one or the other. And so, Chris, thank you for joining my Patreon. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I appreciate all the support that you guys have given me to allow me to just get on here and rant about this stuff. Thank you so much. Yeah. And so those are my reasons aside from just the fact that I like 7R more between the two because I realized on Twitter that that's all I had communicated was just the fact that I liked 7R a little bit more. But I don't think that that should be the full reason why, because I don't think that just my personal taste on that is why. I had other reasons that I didn't really articulate well, and I think this stream was the perfect place to articulate those. So it's not just that, a personal preference or a personal bias. It's really just that one honestly makes more sense because it's just further along and there's more to reuse. And the flexibility of that system is just, I mean, you can really go anywhere with the Re-Trilogy ATB system, right? Like you can go anywhere with it. So again, a lot of people see this as, being conservative with the series or dialing back in a negative way and all these other sorts of things. I must stress that is absolutely not the case. This is about making games in an affordable, effective way. It's about doing something that Final Fantasy has always done. It's about building on systems in the past and creating new ones in the way that most other developers are doing. Right? And I know that some people feel like the spirit of Final Fantasy is creating something wildly new each time, and I agree to an extent that it is. It largely is. It's always about creating something brand new. However, I think that having those base systems in place allows you to explore creating new innovating creative it allows you to explore creating new innovative things in other regards, in other more important ways than just trying to come up with a new battle system each time. Which, again, the idea of doing that is really appealing to our virtues about, what Final Fantasy should be. This grand, ambitious thing that does something that no one's ever done before, right? That always keeps changing, that's never complacent, right? However, there's a balance, like anything in life. And ultimately, it's not about complacency or anything like that. It's not about just being artistically conservative. It's about being practical, man. It's about being smart. It's about not being wasteful. Um, it's about realizing where creating new things actually matters, like where creating something new and important, where focusing your energy actually makes a difference. And I see it making a difference in those elements that I mentioned, rather than the elements that I think haven't even really served the series, right? Because the reception to the battle systems has just been up and down each time. Like a lot of people do love 16's combat, but then if we look back on the other, recent modern takes on FF combat, they've all been really divisive, right? 12's combat, 13's combat, certainly 15's combat. I think actually 15's combat might be the only one in particular where a majority does not like it. I know that's like an insane statement to say. I don't really normally like making that statement. But I legitimately just have not seen people who would actually go out on a limb to like really stick their neck out to like really defend Final Fantasy 15's combat. Maybe you guys are out there, dude. I don't know. Maybe y'all are out there, but like as far as I know, like I don't think anyone was like truly in love with that game's combat. There is just one guy and he won't be named because I know that guy. But like yeah, but like most people won't do it. Not Prof Knock. We love Prof Knock. We love Prof Knock. He would probably defend the combat system, but that's different. He's based. But like, yeah, like so it's just been up and down. Where I think what I think people value the most about Final Fantasy's ability to challenge conventions, to do new things, to explore territory that no one's explored, where I think people really and truly value that is in the story and characters, in the setting. Put Final Fantasy 17 somewhere it's never been before, right? Like you guys remember the Agnes philosophy tech demo, right? Like everyone was like, dude, please let this be the next Final Fantasy. They didn't do it. That game actually became Forspoken. Rest in peace. But it's just like, you know, people also look forward to the progression systems, right? People also look forward to like the sphere grid, materia, junction. Look forward to seeing like what kind of cool system they would implement next. So the way you level and progress your character should be different each time, right? And so a lot of people will say that the battle system of Final Fantasy is like not what FF is about. If that is true, if you believe that Final Fantasy is not about combat, then why not let the developers do this? Why not empower them to do this in a way that would be time effective and cost effective and allow people who are really into the battle system to continue to buy the games because they do play for the combat and continue to thrive in that system, right? Like if that is the case. Now that being said, I would not say that the battle systems of Final Fantasy are like completely arbitrary and not the point of the games in a way. Excuse me. Um, if they weren't the point, or if they weren't a major factor, then they wouldn't be trying to change these battle systems to action or to other things, right? That they think would appeal to a broader audience, which has been their justification for why they're trying to create action games in the first place. Is because, well, they say that action appeals to a broader audience, and as a result, we're switching the system from turn based to action. And so, if that is the case, that implies that the battle system is actually quite important. I don't care about the combat system, just remove Ubisoft hours and nerf the amount of mini games. I can't take another platinum trophy like Rebirth. Okay. So when I do talk about building off Re-Trilogy, this is also like a really important thing to note, and I want to say explicitly, I am not saying copy like Rebirth. Like I'm not saying like they need to take Rebirth and copy every single thing that it did, because I totally don't believe that they should do that. Instead, I think that they should take that base system and like figure it out, right? So take the world map and then be like, okay, how can we redesign the Ubisoft towers and get rid of those and replace them with something else? Copy the good stuff of Rebirth, right? So take that, and then also too, I think that the next FF17, I guess, or like next episode, I think that FF17 should not be anywhere near as long or as content dense as Rebirth. And I do applaud Rebirth for being a very, very, very high volume content game. However, I don't think that's necessary. I don't think anyone is necessarily begging for it. I don't think that they had to go that hard. You know, a solid, 100 hours to platinum is enough. 40 hours main story. That's all people need. Not another 300-hour platinum. Kyle H9, thank you so much for the tip. I think maybe too cynically that FS bestsellers from 7 to 15 have been driven largely on its graphical edge. Without that unique advantage, the sales are falling to average JRPG sales a la Octopath or Xenoblade. I think this was inevitable. Yeah, it is hard to say like how much Final Fantasy's like evening of graphics, so to speak, is having a role in the sales and the interest going down, right? Because if you look at Final Fantasy 7 through 10 in particular, graphical powerhouse. I should include 12 in there as well, because 12 was also, again, graphical powerhouse. There was nothing nearly as beautiful as Final Fantasy 12. Again, I guess you also got to put 13 in there too, because 13, again, truly one of the best looking games on PlayStation 3, still a great looking video game. And, Final Fantasy 15 was very graphically ambitious, but if we're honest and we look at God of War, if we look at Horizon Zero Dawn, when Sony first party really started to push the graphics heavily on PlayStation 4, I do think that Sony first party really pulled ahead as the kind of graphical powerhouse for for the games on that system. And then that's another topic to talk about is multi-platform. So when it comes to multi-platform is really interesting. I don't think that multi-platform is the sole problem here. I know that might be controversial because a lot of people think that if these games were available on Xbox and PC, day one, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. I'm not entirely sure about that. I think, Daryl from FF Union, I think he had a really good take on this on his stream, where he said, if FF16 launched on PC day one, he thinks it would have taken it from 3 million to 4 million, but it wouldn't have taken it to like, 7 to 10 million, right? Which is the kind of success that Square Enix is looking for and needing to sustain the level of fidelity that these games are. And I pretty much agree with that. I think that, had you saw a PC release for 16, it probably would have done 4 million on day one, which is a lot better, but it's not nearly to the level of success that Square Enix is looking for, which is a lot more. So multi-platform is important. Like, don't get me wrong, right? Like, it is important for visibility. You have multiple first party companies. You'd have Microsoft and Sony promoting your game, which is really important. However, multi platform is not like the cure all for this. I don't believe it. And also, people act like there aren't really good selling PlayStation exclusives. Like people buy a PlayStation to play third person action story driven narrative games. Like, that is the reason to buy a PlayStation. It's in line with PlayStation first party titles, right? Like, it's not like Rebirth is wildly different or 16 is wildly different from the same audience who would play God of War, right? Like, if you played God of War 2018 and Ragnarok, the game I should be able to sell you on next is Final Fantasy 16, right? Like, so the base of people who are buying those games are already potential users that would be interested in Final Fantasy. I also think that it's worth noting too that Final Fantasy 7 and 10, which were PlayStation exclusive games, are still the number 1 and number 2 best-selling games for the series of all time. And that was, just the era of when they were exclusive to PlayStation, right? So I don't think the exclusivity is the only difference here, especially not when PlayStation is still, selling hardware. Granddaddy, thank you so much for this super chat. Do you feel like FF9 Remake should follow the lead of FF7 Re-Trilogy, reinventing the story, or should it stay true to its original structure? If so, is innovation more important than preservation? That is a really fantastic question. Again, thank you for the super chat. I think FF9 Remake should just be FF9 remade. I really do. Um, I think that FF7 Re-Trilogy was a great experiment, and I think it's contributed so much to Final Fantasy's identity, and I think it's really set the path for like where we should go next. But I don't think that FF9 should do the FF7R thing because it's just too ambitious. It just takes too much time, and like, you guys realize that next year it'll be 10 years since FF7 was first announced, the remake, the first part. And so by the time the next FF7 part comes out, like, oh my God, dude, it'll be like what, like 12, 13 years that we're looking at the completion of this project? That's a really long time. That's a really, really long time. This is a gigantic fraction of people's lives. And so I know I don't think that FF9 should do that. I think it should just be like a remake. Like for real. For real, for real. So ultimately, I don't think that multiplat is the overall solution. I think that the real solution lies in making a game that can be built upon, that can reuse assets and code and animations and things like that, that they can scrape from Re-Trilogy. I think that they should create a cult-like fan base. There's already a cult-like fan base around the combat system of Re-Trilogy. Re-Trilogy will also have things like the airship and code for the world map and things like that that Final Fantasy fans are desperate to return to the series. And also, too, it will allow them to build the biggest, most expansive games. I also think that Final Fantasy 16's systems have been well enough received that they also deserve to continue in some way. While I do favor the Re-Trilogy's systems for continuing with the main numbered series, I do think that 16 maybe can get another game that takes place in its world, even if it's AA, that continues to use its battle system. It can also get just other Final Fantasy spin-offs or a new IP that continues to build on those mechanics, because again, there is a thriving fan base of those mechanics. And if Final Fantasy 17 just ends up being another thing again, then all you're doing is essentially tossing away all those people that really loved what they saw in Rebirth and in 16, and starting all over again. And the only binding connection there is the words Final Fantasy, which again, those words mean a lot to us, especially those of us in like our late 20s and early 30s and beyond, really. Especially if you're like late 30s and 40s, probably even more so. But for, 20-year-olds growing up on, Hoyoverse games and stuff like that, Final Fantasy does not mean as much. It means maybe the game with Noctis that they saw a few years ago, or that their dad plays, or that that an older family member was like really into, because these games take so long in between their releases. And but ultimately, to the younger generation, to Gen Z and to Gen Alpha, Final Fantasy doesn't have that same impact, right? And so we'll buy it on brand name alone. We'll let Final Fantasy take whatever chances it can. But until the younger generation has that same understanding of what Final Fantasy means, right? Which to me, I believe that the general way of putting it might be that Final Fantasy means the highest quality RPG that you can make. Until that becomes the idea again, until that becomes something that the younger generations can buy into, Final Fantasy isn't going to continue to take off in the ways that we'd hope. And I think that's the most important thing for FF, is to have that, to have that brand, or to have that level of quality associated with its brand. That's the most important thing. And until we get that back, it's boned. There's no hope, right? We have to get that back first. That's the first and most primary thing of everything. Rebirth and 16 are very good starts, but they can't stop there. Does JRPG have that pull anymore though, other than Pokemon if that counts? What do you mean? Also, too, I don't know if like I don't think that anime aesthetics are as like off-putting now as they used to be, if that makes sense. Let me elaborate on that. I think things used to get written off, especially if they had stylized graphics, as lol anime game. And I'm not saying that that doesn't happen to any extent now, by the way. Um, Sly Sanji puts it really well here, saying that Persona and Genshin blew the doors open for anime stuff. Yes. Yes, they did. Yes, they did. And dude, it's really funny. Like it's really funny because I remember growing up, right? I remember growing up and you had the jocks and you had the anime nerds. That's what it was like for a millennial. It's not like that anymore. It's not like that for for Gen Z and Gen Alpha, right? Like for them, the only difference is just what type of anime you watch. Right? Like chat, I go to the gym, chat. I go to the gym and every single car in the lot has anime stickers on it. Every single car in the lot. All the people in the gym chat, all of them are wearing anime merch. All of I'm not even kidding. They're all wearing fucking I turned my fan on, it's getting hot. You may hear my fan for a little bit. I'll turn it off in a second. I'm just sweating a lot. Josh Z, thank you so much. Older fans don't want to hear this, but SE has to attract the next generation of players. I don't know how they do it, but they have to because they're the future. Yep. That's what it is, right? They have to get Gen Z. And what is Gen Z? What are the younger people playing? I always talk like I'm a fucking old man. I'm 33. I'm not that old. I don't think I look that old either. I think I look pretty good for 33. I'll let you guys decide. I don't know. But someone the other day said that they thought I was like 26. It made me like really actually I like two people the other day. They're like, "Wait, you aren't like 20 something?" I was like, "No." I'm like, "Let's go." I'm like, "Let's go." So Persona and Genshin have really turned things around big time. Yeah, you got 20s youth to me based. So, yeah, I mean, Genshin and Persona have done a lot, guys. They've done a lot to to uh to make anime style games appealing to a younger audience. And I'm not even necessarily saying that they need to be completely anime pilled in the next one, but it is to say that them leaning more anime and having more anime-esque visuals are not like is not going to gate off like them or create a barrier, I should say, from them wanting to enter. Anime is mainstream enough to the point of where they can weeb out a little bit on this stuff. I don't want to see FF be transformed to Genshin or Persona just to appeal to newcomers. It's just not FF. To be clear here, I agree with you. I don't think it should be. I think that would be the wrong thing to do. I think the points that some of us are trying to make is that it's okay to weeb out, right? Like they don't have to like try to make it as Western facing as humanly possible because people can take a character with blue hair nowadays. Tony Lee, thank you so much for this super chat. I appreciate it. If Final Fantasy XVII is released as a double A anime, cel shaded graphical style with remake series battle system, do you think it could potentially be more successful? Thank you for the question. And again, thank you for the super chat. Uh, I don't necessarily know. I do think that those are things that could make it a much more cost-effective game, right? Like for as much as we talk about like say, you know, 16 moved more units than say Rebirth, right? But like one thing that we don't know about that is that we don't know as well if 7R ended up being like more profitable per unit, or it probably was, purely predicated on the fact that it was a direct sequel and was able to reuse a ton of character models, assets, code, etc. So I kind of wonder about that. Also, too, like we still don't know if how should I say this? Give me a second. Let me think. I don't know if Final Fantasy VII Rebirth necessarily like sold tremendously less than 16 because we haven't gotten the numbers. And I feel like they wouldn't announce the numbers even if it was selling on par with 16 because it would still be a downward trend from remake. So I genuinely don't necessarily buy that 7R necessary or that Rebirth necessarily sold tremendously less than 16 just yet. I'm still like waiting for the numbers before like I really assess that because I think that a lot of people are commenting on that and might find out that is actually not like the the difference that people are kind of expecting. So I'm gonna wait for more firm sales numbers before I comment on that. But if a cell shaded game that reused Rebirth combat came out, um, would it be more profitable or would it be a major success? I don't know how much more it would sell, right? But if we say that like, but I think the important thing is okay, let's say that like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth sells like 5 million copies, right? And let's say that you make a game that reused the combat systems foundation and the code and stuff like that, and then you did use anime graphics, right? And it also sold 5 million. Well, then the one that used the anime graphics would be more profitable, right? So actually, I'll give you a perfect example of this. Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 1 sold 7 million units. And Persona 5 Lifetime has also sold 7 million units. And so Persona 5 was like tremendously more profitable than Final Fantasy VII Remake, even though, you know, probably about the same amount of revenue came in for each one. And the reason is because Persona 5 took a lot less money to make than Final Fantasy VII Remake did, because Final Fantasy VII Remake has very, very gorgeous graphics and that are very expensive. And Persona 5 also does too, but it's not very expensive to make, relatively. Yeah, no, P5 is not at 10. It's the P5 series at 10. But Persona 5 and Persona 5 Royal are at 7, which is still really good. I mean, also, too, by the way, guys, Near Automata, that's at like 8 million units. That's more than any FF game, barring like 15 of recent years. Actually, at 8 million, it's pretty much up there with like the best selling Final Fantasies, and we still have not gotten a new Near game. And don't fucking say Near Reincarnation, because I know a lot of people have said like Near Reincarnation though, and I'm like, no, shut the fuck up. Not Near Reincarnation, bro. First of all, you can't even go play Near Reincarnation anymore. It's not even an option. It's literally not even an option. You cannot go play it anymore. Alan. Um, I'm issuing you a warning right now. No mentions of Sweet Baby Inc., woke, or DEI in my chat. That is like literally the only thing that will get you banned in my chat. Thanks. Um, you should really look into a CC named Dish. She's a fairly big Genshin content creator who recently got into playing FF7 Remake and Rebirth, and she absolutely loves the new FF7 games. She's the kind of new player that FF should get into. Yeah, that's exactly it. No problem, Alan. You didn't know. That's why I issued the warning first. Um, yeah, yeah, I mean that's exactly who they should be getting, right? Like that's the exact audience that they need to get. Her audience loves it too. Yeah, that's awesome. See, right? And I feel like the combat system is right at home for those types of people. I feel like they could have a lot of interest in this type of game, but the exposure is not there. And also, too, I don't think a remake can necessarily do that, right? Like, I don't think a remake can be the next generation's FF7, right? Like, I feel like only a brand new game can be the next generation's FF7, right? Like, only something that belongs uniquely to the people there to witness it can it really be their new thing, right? Because I think otherwise, Uh, yeah. Otherwise, it's just it's not gonna really land for them the same way. Not with the story that's kind of like already out there. It has to be made for them and relevant to them. And that's not to downplay Retrilogy, but I just think that like in terms of, penetrating that market and having that big appeal, then yeah, I just don't think that I think that it has to be something new for them. Yeah, the Nier Automata anime is phenomenal, by the way. If you guys haven't seen that, please go and check it out. Would an entire new FF game, FF7 game, beyond Advent Children and Dirge, which is a new story for OG players and new ones work. No, I don't think that like a new FF7 thing is like the way to go. Like I don't think we need to do anything more with FF7. I think the FF7 cow is like dry. I think it's done, man. To be honest, I don't think that remakes are the way are like the major way, I should say, forward. Not that there's no place for them, but just that like I don't think that remakes are like the turnaround point for FF right now. Um, I don't think that remake or not remakes because you're talking about a new game. I'm sorry. I don't think revisiting old FFs is like the way and the truth and the light, right? I think that like the established Final Fantasy game should rest. I think that 7R Part 3 should be the finale of Final Fantasy 7 and like that should be it. I think we need something really new. I'm so tired of remakes. Yeah, I think that people yearn for a new Final Fantasy world. Um that's what I personally yearn for. Is I do want to see a brand new FF world. And see that's another thing too, right? Is that the developers they already have to create, a brand new world and brand new characters and all this other stuff to make Final Fantasy work. So I at least think that like building off of the established stuff allows them to focus on that rather than, focusing on combat stuff. Not that they wouldn't have to focus on combat stuff because that's not necessarily how it works. You guys know what I mean though, right? Like I want them to focus on the engine of the vehicle and not the wheels. That's what I'm really trying to say. Like I want them to focus on the experience of driving the car and not trying to make a wheel that rolls better. And I just think that like when it comes to like reinventing the combat. Like what was so cool about like Final Fantasy Classic, I think, is just that they had like that base system, and each time they would add some mechanics to it, and it would just be so fresh and so interesting, right? And so even though Final Fantasy 7 and 8 use the ATB system again, the fact that you go from materia to the junctioning system to having to draw magic and stuff makes that a completely different experience. It feels completely different, right? And then you get to Final Fantasy 9 system, and that also feels fresh, right? And so it's all distinct from one another. Favorite 2D, FF6, right? Like it's all distinct from one another. Um, but they didn't have to like reinvent the way the system worked each time in order to achieve the idea of Final Fantasy being fresh and new every time, right? Final Fantasy 12 system was top tier too. And let me add on to that, Randy, by saying that I actually don't consider Final Fantasy 12 system to be fundamentally different than like 4 through 9, actually. So when we talk about classic FF, like classic FF combat, I actually wouldn't draw a big distinction for FF12. I know a lot of people do because a lot of people are not like big fans of FF12's combat. And admittedly, I'm not like the biggest fan of FF12 combat, but FF12 is still kind of the same system. It's formatted a little weird, and that's where a lot of the contention comes in. But FF12 is not a dramatically different system than like what came before it. FF12 is the same, but you can move during combat. Yeah, that's literally it, right? Like that's literally it. And the fact that you have to use gambits because the flow of the system like works at like an incredibly fast rate. But like people act like FF12 is like, this system where it's like completely different, but like really it's actually not. It's really the same like kind of like system, except you have gambits kind of automating stuff. Gamer Tifa, hello. Thanks for joining us in the stream. I don't even remember FF12 except that I didn't enjoy. Go back to it as an adult, and I think you might enjoy it and appreciate it a little bit more, especially understanding like what they were able to do on like a PlayStation 2. The game is very flawed. Like I'm not gonna lie, it is a flawed game to me. But I do think it's like incredibly impressive in other ways. I respect FF12. Like before we get into like whether FF12 is good or bad or anything like that, I just say that like I have a tremendous amount of respect for like for what FF12 is. Whether it achieved the things that it set out to do, we can have an entirely different discussion about. But the things that FF12 did try to do is it's insanely impressive, and it's a very cool game. And yeah, sorry, I'm dying. I respect it, but I can't fucking enjoy it. Listen, um, yeah, it's got some problems, but I think they almost got it right too in a lot of ways, but they just in like some other ways it was kind of like not, they almost got it right. I think it's worth playing. It's not a game that I would ever tell someone don't play. It's always a game that I would tell someone try because it might be for you, but it also might not be. But I think you'll come out with like a sense of respect for like what it does in either case. Are you worried about Dragon Quest 12 at all? I don't know what to think about Dragon Quest 12 right now because there's all kinds of like weird rumors about it. And yeah, to be honest, bro, I don't know what the fuck's going on with Dragon Quest. Like Dragon Quest 12 is so like undefined at this point that like I don't even know like what's going on with it enough to be worried in the first place. Like it's so weird. But we don't know anything yet about DQ12, and I hope that it's doing okay. I do know that DQ12 has to be like a banger though. Not that like it wouldn't be because Dragon Quest is pretty consistent as a series, but like they really do need a banger. Square needs a banger pretty badly right now, so imagine a world where FF11 and 12 use the 10 combat system. We have some semblance of consistency in the PS2 era. I could have like man, if FF12 used 10's combat, I would have like yeah. And also too, we also say like FF1 through 10, but we also forget that 10-2 also used the job system, also used the ATB system, and arguably the best version of the ATB system, by the way, right? Like, anyway, there has just been so much group cope denial. Like, I don't know. Like, recently around these games, like, never ever reusing anything at all. And maybe I'm a boomer saying this, and I'm like, is it because you young whippersnappers don't remember? You guys don't remember Final Fantasy X too? You know, like, but yeah, like, I don't know. There's just been like really weird denial about that recently, where everyone was trying to be like, no, no, no. It's always completely radically different. And I'm just like, no, the fuck it was not. It was not. It was not, bro. Come on. But I get it because the last 20 years of memory, do it like that. The FF community needs to come together. This BS and fandom wars can't continue because we moved to the point where there may be no FF in the future if it continues. Right, exactly, right? Like imagine if the next few FF games bomb, right? Like the chances of us getting a new big AAA Final Fantasy like is like shot the shit if that happens, right? But also too, what has been like completely and utterly insane to me is that people are like basically blaming people for not being big enough of fans. That is like that is so fucking stupid, bro. Like they're basically saying, "Oh, well, you only accept Final Fantasy when it meets your definition, and you're the reason. You bad fans are the reason why we're in this shit." I'm like, dude, fuck off. That's not how it works. That's not how it works. Nobody is obligated to buy a fucking game, dude. Like, that's just not how it works at all. You can't bully people into buying the game. You can't. You're not gonna. You are not going to belittle people so much that they're like, oh, fuck. They're right. I'm a bad fan. I'm gonna go buy Final Fantasy 16 and Rebirth now because because they told me I was a bad fan and I don't like anything that's different than my ideal Final Fantasy. I got owned and ratioed so hard. Now I have to go buy the game because I'm a loser and like they're making fun of me for not buying. That do you think that's realistically working? Do you think ratioing someone on Twitter is making people buying the is gonna make people buy the game? Do you think ratioing people on Twitter is gonna make people who don't have any idea what the game is want to go buy the game because they see how wonderful and welcoming the community is? All I think is like if I was like someone who wasn't part of the Final Fantasy community and I saw that shit, all I would think is these guys are crazy. I'm not fucking messing with them. I don't want to play their game because if I have anything like trivial to say about their game, they're going to like they're going to like beat my ass after school or something. Like come on, bro. Like it is that helping? Is that helping? It's not helping. It's not helping. It's the popular thing to do. Why is it the popular thing to do? Because it's cathartic. It feels good. It makes you feel good. It makes you feel like you defended your favorite game on social media. It makes you feel like you owned the other person and beat them. But what you don't realize is that all you did was make sure that that person never picks up another Final Fantasy game again. That's all you've done. All you've done is convince them that the series isn't for them anymore, that they don't have a place, that their voice is outweighed, that they should feel bad, and why would they keep being part of the series? By trying to bully and belittle people out of, if they just say, if they explain, like, why it wasn't for them, you know, just be like, reach out to them, be like, hey, man, I think you should try it anyway. You might find yourself pleasantly surprised. You might like it anyway, despite, some of your preconceived notions. Ignore it, whatever. But you're not going to own somebody so hard that they're like, oh, fuck, I better go buy the game. But you will own somebody so hard that they have a negative association with the game because they have a negative association with the people that they had to deal with when, like, just navigating the community. that they no longer just want to fuck with it at all, right? Like one of my friends doesn't want to talk about Iterative on socials because they're afraid of getting trapped in the waifu was. That's probably a smart move. Smart person. Um, I'm not really interested in 9 remake. I'm waiting for 16 complete edition to come to PS5. I've always been so focused on the FF7 fandom. I guess I didn't realize how toxic other parts of the fandom could be. Yeah. And I mean, don't get me wrong, fandom in general can be toxic, right? So I don't think that like Final Fantasy is necessarily like especially toxic or anything like that. But I can say though, in like specifically our case with the recent stuff that's been happening, that that people are trying to basically own each other and like belittle each other and like make it so that I understand Final Fantasy and it's the spirit of FF better than you and yeah, none of that is like really going to help anybody sell like more copies of the game, right? And like even if you're right about like this is what Final Fantasy means, cool. Does it make more people play it? No, then shut the fuck up because like, all you're doing is just making discourse for everybody and just kind of ruining the experience, right? So, yeah, we're not talking about like who is correct here. No one gives a fuck, dude. We're talking about what makes people go buy the game, right? And if you don't have anything to say that doesn't make people go buy the game, then everything you're saying is fucking worthless to the discussion right now. And that's what people don't realize. Lily, oh my God, hello. The toxicity is all over an FF franchise. Yeah, I mean, again, I think the fandom in general is like, always kind of toxic. I don't think I've ever seen a completely toxic free fandom. And I think people that do claim that their fandom is toxic free, those tend to be like the most toxic ones, ironically, because they look over the actual stuff. Shitty fan base behavior has absolutely made me stop interacting with IPs. Yeah, and I feel like Final Fantasy like definitely has that in the way that like it definitely has that in the way that blocks people off from like wanting to engage in the way they normally could or would want to engage. And so I think right now, like for example, right? Like with like the turn-based purist, right? Clearly there has to be like a sizable number of them who are checked out. And I'm not saying that we need to go back to turn-based, right? But clearly that's an audience that Square needs to buy new Final Fantasies if they can't get new people, right? So I think that one thing about Zelda is that with Zelda, there's a lot of people who aren't like very big fans of like the open air system. However, those fans are still buying Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. No matter how much they complain, they're still buying them. Um, I thought that was the case with FF for the longest too, where I was like, all these turn-based fans, for example, who complain, um, will still be buying it. Now I'm also kind of wondering if that's like not the case. Right? Like if they really did just move on. Um, so I don't know. Which, by the way, again, I'm not specifically saying they need to yield to like what the turn-based audience wants specifically or anything like that. I'm just saying that like now as we get into it and we talk about like, who's still here and who's not here and all this other stuff, I'm like, has that actually been a problem? Has that actually turned off enough people who were really, turn-based or bust, I guess you could say? They get flexible with the franchise, which will keep it fresh and exciting, right? Zelda was always an action game though, so it's not one to one. Yeah, I don't feel like I still feel like Breath of the Wild is still an evolution of old Zelda, right? Like I don't feel like it's like insanely different. Dell, thank you so much. for the tier 1. How are you doing, man? Welcome to the chat. Wish you were here earlier when we were talking about like asset reuse and code reuse and why that needs to become more of a thing, because I think you'd probably have some enlightening things to say on that. But you know, we were kind of saying that like, you know, I've only talked like about half the story on Twitter. And part of that, what I mean by that is, you know, I talked about how much I liked Re-Trilogy, and I focused on that. But what I really should have talked about more, and this didn't really occur to me until later on, what I really need to like hone that message in on is that by the end of part 3, they're gonna have like a world map done, right? They're gonna have airship flight programmed. They're gonna have code for all these different things, including combat. And so when it comes to building off of like part 3 of Re-Trilogy, they're gonna have all this stuff that Final Fantasy fans always say they want every single game, because the first 10 games reinforced to them, or the first 9 technically, because 10 doesn't have all those things, really reinforced to them that this is what a Final Fantasy game is supposed to be, and this is what I want from it. It's going to have all those things, right? And so the code and foundation and the general design templates will be there. And so I can only imagine that that would save them a tremendous amount of money and time, and then not to mention the set of animations and assets that they could repurpose for a Final Fantasy 17 by the time part 3 is done is going to be tremendous, right? All that work being done in Unreal Engine as well. If FF17 is ends up being an Unreal Engine game, they could repurpose a ton of that again straight into Final Fantasy 17, and you know, maybe take that from like a 7 or 8 year dev time down to a 5 to 3 year dev time. And I just think that that would make tremendously more sense. And really, that has always kind of been my point. But I think I do think I kind of messed up a little bit, because I kind of just pushed that, like, you know, this is like what my ideal FF game is. But I don't think anyone cares about like what my ideal FF or like what I think the majority of the fandom's ideal FF game is. I think that like the real message is that they remade the main characters from FF7 Remake to Rebirth, even though it probably wasn't necessary. I don't think they seem interested in being economical. I know that's a thing, by the way, too, is that you'd think that they would have reused those main character models, by the way, guys, but they actually remade all the character models for Rebirth, which is insane. Now, actually, for the NPCs, that makes sense. Because the NPCs in Remake were fucking scuffed. They were so scuffed. Like, the NPCs in Remake are terrifying to look at. They look good in Rebirth, but in Remake, oh my God, the NPCs are like nightmare fuel in Remake. Did they really? Yeah, they remake like there's like an article, like a what was it, like CG World or something? Like they put out an article showing like the old cloud model versus like the new cloud model, and all the details. I think Audrey did a post on it. Some other people may have done it too. Um, yeah. I thought people were being dramatic saying characters look uglier in Rebirth. I mean, people are wrong. They definitely don't look uglier. Anyone saying that Remake anything looks better than Rebirth, I feel like they're lying, like straight up. Um, I just don't agree with that. I've extensively looked at both games. Remake is jank in numerous places that people don't even talk about for some reason. But like with Rebirth, everyone zooms in on like the smallest detail. But I'm like, dude, Remake looks so jank. Rebirth does not look that much better than Remake. That's cap. Hold on. That's cap. I'll show you, dog. I will show you. I will show you. You guys don't. It's so funny because that game is not that old. Here, I was able to like Google a screenshot of like the first game. You guys don't remember what Remake looked like, do you? Guys, this is Final Fantasy VII Remake for PlayStation 4. You cannot tell me that Remake does not look better. You cannot tell me. Oh, you got the comparison? Okay, let's take a look at the comparison. Yeah, the hair is tremendously improved. Hair is tremendously improved. Look at the details on the shoulder pauldron as well. Yeah, it's a lot better. I'd say it's a solid improvement, especially on the hair. I think anyone saying the hair looks worse, that's just wrong. And the hair looks tremendously better. Tremendously better. Anyway, this is Final Fantasy VII Remake. Don't tell me that Rebirth doesn't look better. That is cap, dog. That is so cap. Like I said, people just don't remember. Um, People just don't remember like what Remake the first one looked like. Rebirth definitely does look better. Now that being said, um, I don't think that the character model thing was necessary. Like I don't think that it was necessary um to remake Cloud's model. Like I think that was completely unnecessary. However, to say that like the environments, for example, don't look better in Rebirth is like cap. That's like insane levels of cap. But that's what people are saying though, that like remake all around looks better. And I'm like, no, it does not. Like it does not. Rebirth definitely does look better. Um, Even the lighting too, which some people say that the lighting looks better in remake, and like it did not. It did not look better. Um, I think a lot of people just be yapping. Yeah, I know they do. I mean, like one thing people forget is that like in remake, especially on PS4, textures straight up just didn't load. There were many cases in that game where you just walk into like an area and like textures wouldn't load for like a full ass minute. And you're just being like, you just be like looking at like flat textures on the environment or on the NPCs, and it would just look really weird. And Rebirth doesn't have that problem, mostly thanks to the SSD and probably having more memory, having more RAM. Yeah, Tifa's door, for example, where like basically the texture never loads ever. So yeah, that's cap. That's cap. People have like cherry picked screenshots basically of where remake looked really good, and then they use that to be like remake looked better than rebirth. But I promise you, go play that game again, especially play the PS4 port of remake, the original, and you'll be like, never mind. Remake does not look better than rebirth. FF16 is a beautiful game. The only issue I have with FF16 again is like the purple sky stuff. Like, and I get why the purple sky is there, but it is ugly and it overstays its welcome. It way overstays its welcome. Okay, but on launch, Rebirth looks super blurry on performance mode, and they before they added the sharp mode. Remake didn't have this problem, especially on PS5. PS5 plays at 60 without being blurry. That's because Remake is a PS4 game being played on PS5, and Rebirth is a PS5 game. So that's why. But that being said, I think Rebirth still looks better, especially on graphics mode. Again, I don't think people really remember how gnarly some of the environments were in Remake, even in Intergrade. Some of the environments were just gnarly, gnarly. Like, I'm talking about like just straight up like textureless or like low resolution to like an unbelievable degree, right? Like, I mean, here's an image. There's an article about the textures, right? Or like the ground is like almost flat and there is no texture on the ground. It's just like it's flat. It's just brown. Um anyway, yeah, I don't think people are really accurately fairly comparing them. I think I'm so focused on characters, I barely focus on the textures. No, I think that's normal actually. I think that's why most people weren't bothered by it. People don't understand the technicalities. They just felt Rebirth looked bad on performance mode. That's exactly what it is, honestly. Um, but like if you actually look at the textures and the quality of like the assets and stuff like that, Rebirth is a pretty big leap. And I know that people got mad when I said that, especially like when the game was coming out, and I'm like, and like people were like, it's not. And they use like they would take a shot like with really good lighting in a cutscene, and there was like depth of field behind cloud and stuff like that, and it was like perfectly like really cinematic lighting and stuff like that. And then they compare it to like an open world segment of like Rebirth and be like, see, it looks worse. And I'm like, no, it does not. No, it does not. Why are you capping? Zen Rapids, hello. I mean, it's fixed when they added sharp mode. Not particularly honest. If I'm honest, like it's still pretty blurry even with sharp mode on. PS5 Pro will really fix it. Gamer Tifa, thank you so much for the Prime sub. I appreciate it a ton. And thank you for joining the stream today too. I feel like, and maybe because I'm like a PC guy, but like to me, console games always look somewhat blurry. Um, and then I play them on PC, and they always look sharper. This was also the case with FF16. Even like when I look at FF16 on PC, like it's just noticeably better, like tremendously better on PC. And I'm not sure if the textures are drawing in sharper or if it's like just the resolution is better. But like the way PCs render is like actually so much like the image quality that a PC gives off is always just so much better than like the image quality of like a console because the image quality of a console is always like and it's probably because the console is using like that dynamic resolution scaling all the time so it's there are moments where the frame rate's more intense or whatever and so it's always kind of like yeah. Are you playing your console games on a monitor? Most people are playing console games on a television, which shows it works. I play them on both. So I actually because I have to capture footage, so I have to have my console plugged up to my computer monitor, and I also have it plugged up to like my gaming room projector, and so I move my PS5 around a lot. And yeah, I just always noticed that the consoles it just seems blurrier compared to like hold on. I think like Digital Foundry did a video too, and it's just like, let me see if I can find it. Oops. If I can find, I'll put it on screen here for a second. I just wanted to see their video on 16 here. I have it muted, I know. Because I just wanted to show the footage of like a of what I meant. There is like a perfect shot of like a comparison, and I can't find it. Oh, it was of Jill here. Actually, this shot of Joshua works. You may not even know because of the bitrate compression twice. But as you can see, the edges are just sharper. I guess it's because of the anti-aliasing. But then look at the hair too. And the hair is so much sharper. So, I don't know. I just always feel like consoles, like, yeah, it's objectively crispier, yeah, or crisper, yeah. Problem is here you won't care if you never got to see the comparison. I feel like that's kind of like the marketing problem of PS5 Pro, right? Like that's the problem with PS5 Pro is that with PS5 Pro, if you don't see it next to PS5, you won't know or care. And that's kind of the issue that I foresee with like marketing PS5 Pro is that like I'm like, is anyone going to care? Like you kind of have to have like side by sides of everything in order for people to be like, oh my God, I need the Pro. I think with PS4 Pro it was less of an issue because with PS4 Pro it was so reasonably priced that it really didn't matter, right? Because $400 uh wasn't that terrible. But now when we get to 700, it gets really, really tough to be like, oh, I'm gonna take a chance on uh on it being, you know, what I want. So let's also, speaking of, I just wanted to quickly take a look at this rumor that I thought was interesting. Let me pull it up. So this is a rumor about PlayStation 6. It could be entirely baseless. Nobody really knows. But it says that PlayStation 6 could span a console and handheld device. Sony allegedly has two chips in development. So let's give it a read. Um, it seems like we're slowly reaching that point in the generation where PS6 speculation starts to pick up pace. Earlier this week, a report from Reuters revealed Sony had explored a potential relationship with Intel to manufacture a chip for its next gen console, but ultimately opted for AMD once again, with backwards compatibility being massively important to the manufacturer. Now, well regarded tech leaker Kepler L2 has taken to NeoGAF forums to report that two SoCs, or System on a Chips, are allegedly in development for PlayStation's next console. In a post, the snoopster said, I don't know if it's an Xbox Series XS situation or a home console handheld. It's speculated that Microsoft is also planning a console and handheld options for its future hardware. We've been unable to verify claims here, so they remain very much a rumor. It's also worth noting, while two chips may be explored at the moment, there is no guarantee they'll become commercial products by the time PS6 launches in 2027 or 2028. Still, there's been a handheld boom interest of late, Steam Deck driving enormous interest in enthusiast circles, while the console sales overall aren't particularly impressive in isolation. The ability to take your entire Steam library on the go has proven popular. Sony has found success with its Remote Play portable PS Portal this year. We suppose the idea here would be to release two pieces of hardware, a stationary console and a handheld, both of which would share a library and run the same games at different specifications. exactly how much of these hypothetical devices would cost and what kind of challenges they'd create for the developers remains to be seen. We wouldn't read too much into this for now, but it's an interesting point of speculation. Would you be interested in a potential PS6 portable? Are you worried about the idea of two hardware targets? And with PS5 Pro retailing for $700, how much would either of these purported systems even cost? So, that's a lot to think about. Two SoCs is worrying for me. I don't want to have to buy two things. I don't like the idea of there being a low version and a pro version. Okay, so yeah, I like full stop. I think that would be like the worst thing, right? Like the absolute worst thing that could happen is that um there is like a PS6 weak and a PS6 strong. And like um well, actually, I mean, this has already happened. What am I saying? We've already done this. It's called Xbox Series S and Xbox Series X. So it's already been a thing that's happened. Um, and yeah, I agree with you, Dell. Like 100%. I personally, I personally would hate for there to be a PlayStation 6 and there's a PlayStation 6 that's weaker and a PlayStation 6 that's stronger, and you're not going to get the same quality of games. I do feel like if they are going to do that for PlayStation 6, the better way to go is indeed to have one version be a handheld and to have the other version not be a handheld. That is what would be ideal to me. Because otherwise, I am not going to be a fan. I'm not going to be a fan of there just being two different versions of the console. And for developers, we've already seen with Series S that it's just a problem across the board. It hasn't been a good time for developers, and um, it's just not worth it to hold back the generation for the sake of that hardware. That being said, if they offered a portable version and they offered a home console version, and there were two different specifications for them, I would be interested. Now, the only issue I have is that because we're going to have two different specifications, it really does make you think that a lot of these games, they pretty much have to be designed for the handheld. This means that they would be held back in ways for the main console version, which, yeah, as you say right here, would hold the system back ultimately, in the same way that having the Series S would hold back the Series X. So it would be a similar problem overall. That being said, I actually feel like I'm benefiting from the handheld version a lot more than I'm benefiting from the dedicated two dedicated consoles where one dedicated console is just weaker than the other one, right? So I would be more okay with that. I also think too that if this is the new thing that Sony is going to do, because Microsoft is planning on it, right? Like Microsoft is already planning an Xbox handheld. They want it to be compatible with Game Pass. If Microsoft is doing it, then essentially this is just going to be what the industry is going to be going forward, right? Like it's going to be the handheld version of the game, and then it's going to be the main console version. But like one of the issues I do see with that too is that it does make the value proposition that Nintendo has a little bit better, right? Because of the Switch. So I mean, I assume that these consoles would be something that you can plug up to a TV using like an HDMI hub. And if that's the case, if basically, Xbox becomes a Switch and PlayStation also becomes its own Switch, and then you can actually buy, the full versions, like the full console version where it's playing these games at the aggressive 4K fidelity that you'd want. I wouldn't be opposed to it. Like I wouldn't be uh that could still be a winner for me potentially. The other big thing that I really see with this is that Sony has not been doing particularly well in Japan. In fact, Sony's kind of barely existed in Japan. Um, they are not anywhere near where they were. They're nowhere near where they were with PS1 and PS2. And the only way I could ever see Sony getting back to where they were, the only way they'd even come close, is to have another PlayStation handheld. I mean, they did that to themselves. Yeah, they did do that to themselves. There's no one else to blame other than themselves. Although, arguably, I would say the shift away from home consoles being as important in Japan also didn't really help them. Consoles are barely existing in Japan, you mean? Yeah, exactly. So it's not even just like, it's not even necessarily that PlayStation itself is no longer existing. It's just like home consoles in general are no longer desirable. And for as big as something like PS4 was, could you imagine how much bigger PS4 would be if PS4 was big in Japan? Right? Like if PS4 was like truly something big in Japan. Because I think PS4 tapped out at like 9 million units in Japan. So it didn't end up being as big of a success there as it was here. The big two are in a weird situation right now. Xbox struggles really bad, and Sony just canceled a $300 million game. Yeah. Neither one of them really know what they're doing right now. Steam Deck actually had a sizable Japanese audience at launch. I could see it. There's a lot of people in Japan that are gaming on PC, it feels like. But Japan just really thrives on portables, right? Like portables are the way that you get that market. It's been a downhill game for Sony ever since PlayStation 2, or I mean, starting with PlayStation 3 and then 4 and 5, and it just has not been taking off too well. They really just don't know what they're doing in terms of appealing to the Japanese audience. And so but I do think that if they were to try to launch a PlayStation 6 portable, I think it'd take off. I think it'd do extremely well there. I mean, there's a lot of questions right now about whether, Switch 2 will be able to run Final Fantasy 16 or Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth. I'm really curious if those games do end up getting Switch 2 ports, how well they will sell, right? Because Crisis Core Reunion also had a Switch port. And shockingly, the Crisis Core Reunion Switch port didn't do better than the PS4 and 5 versions, which I actually found pretty shocking, by the way. Because I thought the Crisis Core Reunion on Switch would do pretty good numbers, right? Because that was a game that sold pretty decently on PSP when it came out. But actually, the PS4 and PS5 versions really sold well, or not really sold well. Uh, the PS4 and PS5 version still sold more than the Switch version. So people who want to play FF that bad will get it on PC or PS4. Exactly. But of course, that also brings me back to the fact that I don't think that Final Fantasy has a multi-platform problem as much as I think it has a brand problem. Like FF has a brand problem more than it has a platform availability problem. Because again, people that prefer story heavy third person games are already on PlayStation. Like they're already on a PS5. Like because they bought a PS5 because that's the system that does that. That's the system of third party story driven games. Like I don't think that like if you put that shit on Xbox, no one's gonna give a fuck, bro. No one's gonna give a fuck that um that shit is on Xbox because no, like that's not the type of games they play. They make fun of us. They make fun of us for liking those types of games. Oh, lol, another third person story game from Sony. That's all y'all got. It's the same movie game. Lol. Like that's what they're gonna say, bro. You sounded like Chad Warden for a second there. Well, I'll tell you why I sounded like Chad Warden. It's because I wiped my ass with $600. That's why I sounded like Chad Warden. Bullying. I know a lot of people who aren't Final Fantasy fans who wait for the PC ports only to lose interest by the time they release. Yeah, bro. I mean, that's the problem is that the PC ports are coming out like after the main marketing window for the game, right? So you can't do a PC port this a year later and it sell the same amount. It's not going to. That's not how it works. And that's what a lot of people don't understand is that like the game has to be available for people to get when they're at their most hyped, which is during the marketing cycle before anyone else has played the game, right? If you try to do it a year later, you have to first remind them that the game even existed. And then you have to remind them that, oh hey, it's coming to your platform now. And then you have to get them excited to play a game that all their friends already played and that there's already spoilers for everywhere. How are you going to do that? I don't know. I don't know. But one thing under the iceberg mentions here is that PC ports sell well over time, and that is so true. PC ports tend to have better legs than say console ports do. Because the console versions of a game will stop selling after a while, but man, PC versions of a game on Steam can sell like in perpetuity for a very long time, right? Part of that has to do with the fact that like with a console game, you kind of have to remaster it and update it, or people expect you to, or in order for them to like buy it again, right? And console people are also very physical oriented, so they aren't shopping like necessarily the digital store as much. But like take for example Metal Gear Rising, right? You can go buy Metal Gear Rising right now on PC and play it, right? You can't even buy Metal Gear Rising on console. You'd have to go buy like the PS3 port and play on your PS3, right? And a lot of the console versions of games are kind of like locked to like the resolutions and frame rates. It's on Xbox Series, right? But even still, are you going to buy that on Xbox Series or would you just buy it on PC? You'd probably just buy it on PC, especially for an older game like that. I think once PS loses exclusives, it's going to be over. Once companies like Square have that same day PC releases, people are going to start switching to PC. The portable PlayStations may be a savior in the future. I think that the convenience of the hardware and the experience of the hardware is going to trump like just that like people's affiliations with the hardware. For example, like my favorite gaming hardware of all time is Steam Deck by far. By far. And the fact that I can have cloud saves that are synced and I can pick up my Steam Deck and I can keep playing anywhere I am, that's amazing to me. I would not have finished Persona 3 Reload if it wasn't for that. and Metaphor is coming out, and I'm definitely getting Metaphor on PC. Like, there's not a doubt in my mind that I'm getting Metaphor on PC because if I get Metaphor on PC, I can play it on my handheld, right? And they're saying that they said Metaphor is going to be as long as Persona 5, right? So good luck to everyone playing that on PS5. I don't want to play that on PS5 personally. No shame to anyone that does, but like just being able to play it on my Steam Deck, like anywhere I go, that's gonna be awesome. So I'll be able to reasonably get through that game thanks to Steam. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm so small. Thanks to Steam, I'll be able to like reasonably get through it. Then yeah. Imagine FF9 remake day one on PC. Yeah. Oh, it'd be great. Then I can put it on the Steam Deck. It's also kind of a missed opportunity too that that FF16 isn't Steam Deck optimized. I really think they messed up with that, if I'm honest. I really think that was a big L on Square's part to not Steam Deck optimize that game. Because a lot of people buy stuff nowadays predicated on if they can play it on Steam Deck. And by a lot of people, I specifically mean Ryan, Night Sky Prince. I'm not even sure if that's possible for them to do. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Larian got Baldur's Gate 3 Steam Deck compatible, and Cyberpunk is. So FF16 looks like it'd be really rough to get running smoothly on Steam Deck. Probably not impossible though. It runs at like 20-ish frames. So if they could just fabricate 10 more frames, it'd be great. Best hair on YouTube. Thank you so much. That's because Steam Deck compatible is just Series S compatible, to be honest. Damn. That makes sense, right? If you can get it running on a Series S, then you get it running on Steam Deck. Actually, that damn makes you think. If the Switch can run The Witcher 3, the Steam Deck can run an optimized FF16, yeah. I don't think it's impossible, right? Because do we have footage of... There's people already trying to get it running on there. Let's watch this video. Hold on.
Is now fully released, so huge thanks to Square Enix for giving us a key so we could test this out properly on the Steam Deck, and I'm sad to say it's no better than the demo. In fact, actually now we get into the later game, things actually get much worse. Through some of the cutscenes, some of the dips under that 20 frames per second are bearable for a small amount of time, and it doesn't look absolutely horrendous, and you can be forgiven of thinking that this would be playable with some other settings. So although some of these boss fight does dip and stay around the 20, it's quite stable and you can just about stomach it. And when we get into the kind of first section after the demo area and put things on XeSS balance, for example, on the lowest graphic settings, even with medium texture just to make it look a little bit nicer, or using FSR3 balance with frame generation, you could almost think that this was playable. Getting a solid 30 capped on XeSS balanced does make it feel and look quite nice. FSR3 does perform quite well with frame generation. Unfortunately, until battles and other things start. FSR3 does look superior, but as soon as you go into battle, it almost becomes slow-mo mode. And if you turn off the frame generation,
Bro, it's turn-based. It's turn-based. Let's go.
it's just a little bit worse than XES balanced with some of the fuzziness. So if you are thinking that frame generation is going to save you on this one, it definitely will not, and you'll see why a little bit more in a little while. As we look at the battle as XES has balance, a lot of these instance battles do perform quite well, and we can get a solid locked 30 with it looking actually very good on the Steam Deck screen itself. Now this is the OLED model. I do have the 4GB UMA buffer set and the cryo utilities tweak.
By the way, this would have made like a badass super boss, by the way. Like, if you could like fight like a semi-prime Jill. Like on like some Kingdom Hearts 2, like data fight shit, like show me your strength, Clyde. I don't know. Like Ultima Jill, I don't know what the fuck. That would have made like the sickest fucking super boss, like non-canon bullshit super boss data fight for this game. And they already kind of had the groundwork for that. That would have been so dope. Anyway, that's just something I thought of right then.
As well, but frame generation just does not work properly on the Steam Deck, and it doesn't matter what game we try this in, it just doesn't function correctly. It looks like it does in certain scenarios, and then it absolutely tanks performance or just makes input latency a nightmare. Now when we get to the forest area a little bit further in the game, it really takes a massive performance hit, and apparently it gets even worse after the forest area, but this is as far as I've got so far. And when we can look at it and play like this, which is on GeForce Now, and I'll show a bit more of that in a minute, it really does make you wonder if you want to try and play through with these low frame rates. Now again, in certain sections it just sticks around this 20 to 30 frames per second mark, but then when we go into battles it does steady out a little bit and it is almost playable. It has been officially marked as unsupported on the Steam Deck, and I actually support them on this one. I don't think this is a good way to play the game. If it's the only way you've got to play the game, then I can see you wanting to struggle through with this and just take those performance hits. But again, even with AMD's FSR3, with nothing going on and frame generation in the forest, it's just absolutely unplayable. Also, there's a weird bug that every time you turn frame generation on or off, it also enables HDR, so watch out for that. But even here, with nothing going on, trying to hold 30 frames per second with frame generation just isn't happening. It's just an absolute slideshow. This has now officially been added to GeForce Now though, so if you do want to play this on the go and you have decent internet, then you can subscribe to the GeForce Now service and play this on your Steam Deck in full ultra glory. And this,
Yeah. Yeah. It sucks. It's like 20 frames-ish per second. I do feel like if they... Yeah, it probably would have costed a lot of money, though. That's why they didn't do it, right? Because you would have had to actually have a studio, basically. You'd have had to essentially pay people to go back in and optimize some of these assets. And it would cost money. And it probably was not going to sell that much more on the Steam Decks, or that many people needed the Steam Deck version of it to be able to do it. However, if this game ever comes to Xbox and they have to make optimizations to get it to run on Xbox Series S, those optimizations could come back to the Steam Deck version, which could then allow the Steam Deck version to become playable. This is exactly what happened to Baldur's Gate 3, because when Larian had to go in and optimize the game for the Series S, they ended up saving so much memory and so many other resources that the game's performance actually ended up being workable on Steam Deck. And now BG3 is perfectly playable on it. And so it might happen. That's kind of like what happened with Nier Automata and PC Game Pass. Yeah, it's one of those things where re-releases actually really benefit a game, and not necessarily because we have to pay for it again. But I mean, yeah, sometimes we do, but like sometimes the re-release funds the developers being able to make those types of fixes and those types of updates and optimizations for the game that we would not be able to get funded otherwise, right? Like they wouldn't be able to uh, really do without doing them, right? Which is why maybe one day we'll get FMC in Persona 3 Reload. Absolute random hot take. Actually, I would even if MC doesn't come to Reload, I would be like a really big fan of like Persona 3 Reload getting an ultimate re-release with new stuff. Okay, Atlas Twitter is gonna kill me now. But I would buy it. I would buy it. I know that Atlas fans hate that shit, but it's not like their games aren't ultra complete whenever they come out anyway. Canceled on Twitter. Dude, I would get like I would never share that take on Twitter. I would get my ass ate up and not in a good way. Not in the good way. But I would buy it if they did, Persona 3 re-reloaded and it had even more content on it. Because honestly, some of the stuff, okay, like some of the stuff I'd want on that would be like them fixing the dorm lighting and graphics. Because one thing I do hate about Reload, unfortunately, is that I feel like the dorm is sauceless in Reload. The dorm is so fucking sauceless in Reload. Let's talk about the FF13 leaks. Oh, you're right. You're right. Let's talk about those because that shit is funny. That shit is funny as fuck. Okay. Hold on, let me pull it up. That shit was really funny. Okay. 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 Let me just So, there have been some leaks from ultra reliable source 4chan known for only leaking real and true information to the general public. Without 4chan, we would not have anything. Gamers would be completely left in the dark. But it is thanks to the good men and women of 4chan that we are able to know the latest gaming news way ahead of time. And today, today, we got a brand new rumor here about the Final Fantasy 13 trilogy that may surprise and delight you. Chat, do we think this is real? Um, okay. So I do think the Final Fantasy 13 remaster is coming. I really do believe it's coming. And I'm excited for it because I think this is an opportunity for them to really address some of the grievances that I had with Final Fantasy 13. The fact that you can't switch characters in battle, the fact that you die whenever your party leader dies, which I'm okay with that in Persona games, but in Final Fantasy 13, it really didn't make as much sense because it's not like, it's a punishment for targeting like an elemental weakness or something. It really just felt like you randomly died sometime with the way 13 system worked. So if they can bring those quality of life features that were introduced in Final Fantasy 13 2 back into Final Fantasy 13, I would be really excited for a Final Fantasy 13 remaster. Especially if they can open up the game's battle system and the growth system right away. Because I don't know if you guys remember this, but you actually can't choose who you're playing as all the way until Chapter 9. Also, what happens at Chapter 9 is that the paradigm system fully unlocks, which means you don't actually get access to the growth system in the game fully until the 10th out of the 13th chapter, around there. It's utterly ridiculous. I don't know why they did that to unlock all the roles that late in the game. It's just utterly insane. If they can go back and update Final Fantasy 13 and bring it up to the current standard that we have for modern Final Fantasy games, I would certainly buy it. I think that it would be awesome. If they could bring Final Fantasy 13 all the quality of life features that I would expect for it to have, it would be an instant buy for me. However, we got a rumor from 4chan today. It's really funny. Here is what it has to say. Final Fantasy 13 Remastered Trilogy coming to PC, PS5, and Xbox Series X. Square will announce a remastered trilogy of the Final Fantasy 13 games. Each game will cost $50, but if you already own the games on PC/Xbox, you can get a huge discount. The games will get a bundle for $129. Okay, right out of the gate, ain't no way I would pay $129 for this trilogy. Like, in 2024. That is completely ridiculous, man. Like, the games, I don't even know if the games altogether right now, the whole trilogy, if you bought it on Steam, would actually even cost a full $70. At full price, no sale, right? Bro, who is out here asking for this trilogy at that price? Yeah, I don't believe it's real. I don't believe this rumor is real at all. Again, I do hope that these games are coming, but, you know. Now, that being said, Square Enix has endorsed this, or how should I say this? Square Enix has used this pricing model before. It would not be the first time that they've used it. The Pixel remasters were also priced individually, and all the Pixel remasters together were like, what was it, like $80, something like that? It was something like that. I think that's how much all the Pixel remasters cost together. It was $75. Right. Thank you, Pillow Talk. $75 for all the Pixel remasters together. So again, even though this rumor probably doesn't have much to it, it still is not uncharacteristic of Square Enix to charge per remaster. And that being said, I also feel like I wouldn't want it to be priced this way. I would prefer 13.2 and Lightning Returns were more of straight ports, and all the attention was put on Final Fantasy 13-1, truly remastering that game. Like, really updating the visuals, really overhauling a lot of the battle mechanics, really focusing on that game. I want them to actually put in a lot of effort to updating Final Fantasy 13 base. And I think that 13.2 and Lightning Returns are already kind of fine experiences as they are for anyone who wants more 13. I would rather them do that than be like, oh, these are just kind of updated ports and that's it. And we spread ourselves thin across all three games. I want them to laser focus on the first game. The rumor then says games will run at 4K, 60 frames per second. That's to be expected. These are reports of PS3 games. Improved graphics and textures, additional effects as well. Something that you would expect with any remaster. The games already look really phenomenal if you can ever get them running on a PC or on the Xbox. It is really just gorgeous. These games have not aged a day, honestly. They just look absolutely gorgeous. All DLC included. That's a relief. It's really mostly 13.2 and Lightning Returns that have DLC. The first 13 doesn't really have any DLC at all. They went really crazy with Lightning Returns because with Lightning Returns, they had all the different costumes that you could get for Lightning. I remember one of my favorite costumes that I had for her was Yuna. So you can actually put Lightning in Yuna's costume. You can put her in Cloud's as well. I remember Cloud's actually being pretty OP. Lightning Returns had like a really phenomenal battle system to it. I think that battle system was like dope. I think if they actually put that battle system in the first game, it would have been like a little bit better received. The only thing that it's missing is party members because there were no party members in Lightning Returns. Lightning Returns is a game I have a love-hate relationship with because I think Lightning Returns made a lot of cool forward steps, but I also think that it made like a lot of backward steps too that just yeah, that just really sucked. Holy snap, this is the first time seeing lightning in you in a summoning costume. Oh, you never seen it before? That's funny. PS5 will get DualSense support. Original and remixed OST. It's really hard for me to imagine like Final Fantasy 13 having like a remixed or updated OST. The last time I heard Final Fantasy 13, it sounded the way you would expect like a modern video game to sound. However, if by updated remixed OST they mean like they would actually have, like a orchestral music playing or something like that, that would be really cool. Yeah, it's just really hard for me to imagine what a remixed OST would sound like. However, if they do a remixed OST, there is only one request I have, and you guys already know what that is. I want the traditional Final Fantasy Victory fanfare to return to Final Fantasy 13. What are you remixing it for? It's already orchestral. Yeah, that's something that also makes me think, what's the point, right? Like, I guess it's like an easy bullet point to add. It wouldn't be cheap to do either, so I don't know like why they would remix the OST. It's a PS3 game, not a PS1 or PS2 game. I don't think it really needs an updated, arranged version. But I wouldn't say that that really clues me off of it. Not in the same way that this next bullet point does. Quality of life updates like previous remasters, fast battle mode, turn off random battles, level up characters easily. Early 2025. What random battles? Yeah, what random battles? That's a good question. So when I first saw that, I was like, Final Fantasy 13 does not have random battles. How are we going to turn off random battles? Dog, there are no random battles. However, what a lot of people pointed out is that they don't think they mean random battles in Final Fantasy 13. They think that they mean like random battles in 13 2. Because if you guys recall, in Final Fantasy 13 2, there are random-ish battles where enemies actually spawn around you, and then you can choose to run away from them or not. So 13.2 has like this weird hybrid system of both random battles and non-random at the same time. And yeah, they're really easy to avoid, but it's really interesting that they mention that here because it makes me think that like, oh, yeah. And that also raises the question too of like with Final Fantasy 13 remaster, if on the 1% chance this is true, would you be able to deactivate enemy encounters in 13? Because that would actually be somewhat useful in 13 because 13 has so many enemy encounters actually that it can really be kind of a problem at a certain point. 13 has a tremendous amount of battles that it throws at you. Sometimes you have nothing to do but just be in battles in a long hallway for hours at a time. And it's just back to back, long, long battles over and over and over again. And it's one of the things that really, yes, destroys the pacing, Chad, with that game so badly. I think that it's one of the things that made me not a Final Fantasy 13 apologist, right? Like, I could maybe be an apologist for that game if I wasn't so locked into battles all the fucking time, all the time. And then I think the worst part about it is that the pacing of the battles is really slow. Like, it is really slow. Right. And now they fixed that in Final Fantasy 13 too. If you play 13-2, you're able to preemptively strike enemies. And through doing that, it allows you to start with haste and other buffs that allow you to finish out the fights really quickly. So the pace of the battles are tremendously faster in Final Fantasy 13 too, which is a big reason I love 13 too. And then with 13, it doesn't work for me. Final Fantasy 13 is like genuinely a game that I could see myself enjoying but they have to go back and smooth out all of the rough parts of that game because there's just so many rough parts. There's so many rough parts. But if they can keep what's good about it, and they can kind of mitigate a lot of the things that made the game so flawed, such as the pacing of battles being so long. And yes, chat, that's even if you get 5 stars. That's even if you're min-maxing and paradigm switching appropriately and really staggering the enemy. It still takes a insanely long time for some of the normal battles. And a lot of the times you're just doing chip damage on enemies whenever you don't have a stagger, which also just makes it feel kind of just poorly paced. It's one of the things I love about, Re-Trilogy is that at least in Re-Trilogy, it does feel like you're doing some damage to enemies, even when they aren't staggered. I mean, in Rebirth, sometimes the enemies will die before you can stagger them. So, yeah, the pacing of battles feels fast, like commands are going off fast. However, if you really look at the speed of the battle itself from start to finish, in 13, it's actually incredibly slow. So just having something like a fast battle mode would actually tremendously improve the experience with Final Fantasy 13, right? Like, the way haste works in that game should actually be the default speed of the game. Like, if haste was how that game worked all the time, then the speed of the battle system would feel fine. Another thing, too, is that the battle system does start to feel a lot faster and more fluid, but only toward the end of the game when you have all the ATB bars unlocked. And so before you have all the ATB bars unlocked, when you only have like 2, 3, maybe 4 ATB bars, it's really slow. But when you got like your full 6 ATB bars, I believe, that's when the battle system really starts to feel fluid and you're really engaged in it. And it feels like you're stacking those commands on top of each other. And then at that point, it's great. But when you start, dude, it is cheeks. It is cheeks. It's fun to control the summons, though, to control the Eidolons. When you get on, like, Odin, for example, and you're doing, like, all of his moves and that type of stuff, it's really cool. I like 13's battle system. It's just ultimately got a lot of flaws in it. And again, a lot of those flaws were addressed in Final Fantasy 13 2. And if you can bring 13 2's quality of life features back to Final Fantasy 13 1, I can really see it being a game that I do kind of fall into the apologist camp for. But as Final Fantasy 13 stands now, it's a game that I'm quite critical of because there are just so many things, a lot of them just really small things, that ultimately held the game back from being as great as it could have been. Do I think this rumor is true? I don't think this rumor is true, but I do think that there may be incidental truth within the rumor. I can see, just like with the Pixel remasters, Square Enix charging for each one of these. That's entirely possible. But I don't think that the source of this rumor in particular is valid. Let's not front, 13 story is kind of as. It is kind of as. But, I like certain things about it, right? Like, I like lightning, actually. A lot of people think because I'm a 13 hater that I would hate lightning. I don't actually hate lightning. I actually think lightning is the coolest character in the game by far. I actually really enjoy lightning. But it's like the other characters that I have a problem with. I think lightning is fine. I think Saz is fine. Fang is fine. I think Hope is like, I don't dislike Hope. I don't dislike Hope. I think Hope is people underrate Hope quite a lot. But I do think that the writers kind of messed up in how they portrayed Hope a little bit. Like how they portrayed like that revenge arc. They didn't really make it well enough of a point to connect Snow to why he thought, blaming Snow for like the death of his mom. If that was articulated, if that was shown or rewritten in a way where it made a little bit more sense to the viewer for Hope to feel that type of vengeance in himself, then I think it would have worked better. Like they do the exact same story in oh my God, Alexander, you stole it right from me. I was literally going to mention the arc with Aragaki in Persona 3 and how Aragaki and Snow actually kind of look alike, even design wise. And then you have him, and you have, like the kid trope, and in this case, it'd be Hope, right? And it's very common Japanese story trope that makes sense. And so it just is like, you know, I don't know. You had that exact trope there. And I feel like, Persona 3 actually really did that same trope really well. And then that trope is not done as well in Final Fantasy 13 with Snow. So if they would have gave me like a little bit more justification for like why Hope felt that way, like if they had shown something a lot more damning of Snow, and Snow had like a little bit more of a like a you know like a real reason for that revenge arc to like really take place. If that was there, I think I would have resonated with it. Yeah, Persona 3 did like the exact same story, really, but Persona 3 did it way better. Unfortunately, 13 didn't do it as great. I think 13 should get like a remake of sorts. Is that controversial to say? I'm a bigger fan of remakes of games that had potential, but didn't see out that potential within their first release than I am of remakes of timeless classics. Like, I would prefer a remake of a Final Fantasy game with mixed reception than a Final Fantasy game that's like an all time classic. Legitimately, I think I'd be more excited for 13 Remake than I would be for like Final Fantasy 6 Remake. And I know that's an insane take. I know that's an insane take, chat. But listen to me. Final Fantasy 6 is already a timeless masterpiece. The chances of you making Final Fantasy 6 but worse is like not as good, right? You can't making a better Final Fantasy 6 is difficult to do. But you can very much make a better Final Fantasy 13. You can absolutely make a better Final Fantasy 13. Right? What about FF10? People like 10, but so many don't want to remake. I think 10 was the last real FF game. I don't know. I'm in like a weird place with FF10 remake, the idea of that. Like I don't think I'd like cringe at the idea of FF10 remake, but I don't know if I'd be like stupid excited for it cuz Night Sky Prince is very controversial. Like I'm not going to lie, I am. I am. Like me just breathing is like a controversial thing. But yeah, ultimately, I do think that Final Fantasy 13 remaster is going to be a thing. I don't think this rumor is a legitimate thing, but I do think that it is in the works somewhere at Square Enix, and it is something that I'm looking forward to when it comes. I think it is going to greatly improve a lot of people's impressions of 13. It might turn some 13 haters into apologists, but some people are just going to continue to be 13 haters because let's be honest, it's not going to fix a lot of people's issues with the story. It's not going to fix a lot of people's issues with the characterization, some of the scenes with Snow and Hope. It's not going to fix the linear level design, um, the sort of corridors where there's just nothing to do but go down the hallway and fight enemies. There's no exploration or anything like that. Some of those flaws are hard baked into Final Fantasy 13, and there is just no way to get around them. However, for a lot of the more gentle flaws that can be smoothed out, a Final Fantasy 13 remaster can probably do it and make a significantly better game. And also, there's just so many people who really would love to play this game on modern hardware that isn't an Xbox, where most Final Fantasy fans are not at. And it's just a great opportunity for them to be able to play the game and for so many people to be able to enjoy it who've been looking forward to playing this one. Because again, you can play pretty much every Final Fantasy now on PlayStation except for this one. You can play 1 through 6 for the Pixel remasters. You can play 7, 8, 9, and 10 on PS5. You can also play 12. You can play 14, 15, 16, and the 7R trilogy, but you cannot play Final Fantasy 13. I guess you also can't play FF11 on PS5. We need to do something about FF11, Square. When is FF11 offline coming, Square? When is FF11 offline coming, Square? I don't know if they'll ever do anything with FF11. But if they do, that would be nice. But until then, this is what we're left with, and hopefully Square Enix does in fact release Final Fantasy 13 Remaster. Wait, how can you play 7 and 8? Wait, are you serious? You can play 7 and 8 OG on PS5. You didn't know that? Look at Steve. Like there's like straight up ports that you can play of the OG. You didn't know? I mean, I play on PC mostly. Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, yeah. You can play 7, 8, and 9 on PS5 and 10. You can basically play the whole series on PS5. And it's what a lot of people were talking about, because you can play the entire Final Fantasy series right now on PS5, but you can't play 13. It's the only game on PS5 you can't play, which is kind of historic, right? Because it's the first time really that like the whole series has been available in one place. I think since PS1, because the PS1 also had those ports of games, but like yeah, Square Enix is afraid of Final Fantasy 13. I don't think they're afraid, but I think CPU one is just busy. And I think they got a lot going on. That being said, they kind of do need it because, guys, we don't have anything currently announced for next year unless Final Fantasy IX Remake ends up happening. But that game is just so MIA. It's been leaking stuff behind the scenes, but we haven't seen like a real thing from it yet. I want 17, me and you both. Like there's basically nothing I want more from Final Fantasy than 17. Like everything else is like just not 17. Like it's not. Um I know that most people are like kind of into the nostalgia dip, but I'm not. Like I want the new thing. I want the new thing hella bad. Are you going to stream the State of Play tomorrow? I am going to stream the State of Play tomorrow for sure. For sure, we're streaming the State of Play tomorrow. Not even a question. So I hope you guys all look forward to that. Uh, and I do have the thing scheduled. So after this stream, make sure that you, um, if you're on the YouTube side of things, make sure that you hit the notification thing on that too. Only thing other only other thing 17 that would get me excited is FF11 offline. FF11 offline would be exciting because it would basically be Final Fantasy 17 for a lot of people, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? Because so many people have not played Final Fantasy 11. I mean, like, think about how much of what percentage of the fan base, like, of the single player games hasn't played 14. Then think of, like, how much smaller it even is for, like, FF11, right? A lot of people have not played FF11. A lot of people. And so, yeah, if they ever did make FF11 offline, that would essentially just be Final Fantasy 17 for people. Is FF11 a massive game story-wise? It's a massive game, period. FF11 offline would be a bigger project than fixing 13.1. I mean, yeah, FF11 offline would basically just be a mainline title. It would basically be as expensive as Final Fantasy 17 to make. There's no cheap way to make FF11 offline. However, there are so many questions about what you do with Final Fantasy 11, right? Because Final Fantasy 11 is going to shut down one day. Like, it's kind of inevitable. It will no longer be playable one day. They've already gone into maintenance mode, right? Because all their PS2 dev kit stopped working. So they can't even make new content for the game. So I think that they have to do something with Final Fantasy 11. They could do a DQ10 kind of remake style with turn-based traditional combat. I think what they could, I mean, they could also do like a pixel game. Like if we want to go like really cheap and just preserve as much of FF11 as possible, like in terms of story, they could make an FF11 pixel game, and they could probably fit in like all the stories of all the expansions in that, and then make it like an ATB turn-based game with like a world map and everything, like an actual true like this is like a retelling of the Final Fantasy 11 stories as like an evolution of like Final Fantasy like 6, like the Super Nintendo FFs. That would be like a really cheap way for them to like preserve FF11 and make it so that people can still experience FF11 in some way. That's what I would do. But yeah, there's just so many people haven't had an opportunity to play 11. They're gonna make it like 15 Pocket Edition instead. That would also be a great idea. Like if they could make it like 15 Pocket Edition. Um, Melly Melly, thank you so much for the tier 1 gift sub. I appreciate it. And thank you for joining us today. Greatly appreciated. Yeah, I mean, um, I would just like to see it modernized with FF14 assets. You mean like using FF14 assets to remake Final Fantasy 11? That would be an interesting idea. Meant to sub but enjoy the gift sub. Wow, okay. Well then thank you for 2 subs then. I appreciate it. Oh man. Yeah, this is a good time to sub right now because this week is gonna be a very stream centric week for the channel. So obviously we have the stream that's happening right now. Tomorrow we have the state of play. And then we haven't locked it in yet, but I think we're talking about Wednesday for maybe the Final Fantasy Avengers to assemble. As I talked about earlier in the stream, I don't know if you guys got to hear that. Um, but essentially what we're doing is that I'm having a bunch of FF content creator guests on, and it'll be kind of an extension of the chat we kind of had today, where we're going to be talking about where the community wants Final Fantasy to go going forward. What's sustainable for Square Enix to do? Um, So that's going to be a really thought-provoking conversation, and I hope to bring you guys a lot of different perspectives. Although I think all of the guests that I have on, except for maybe Baby Seal, I think we're mostly on the same page. I don't think he's on like an entirely different page, but I think he may have a different nuance to some of the arguments. But um, we're all pretty much on the same page of like that there needs to be like some asset reuse. That there needs to be like a centralized battle system for Final Fantasy. Max? I can't just have Max on willy-nilly, guys. I would love to have Max on over him. I would. I would. If I could just call up Max anytime. Really cool guy, by the way. Obviously. But yeah, he's a great guy. Uh, the next time I talk to Max Dude in a podcast will probably be for re-trilogy stuff. Because last we all chatted, he wanted to do another he wanted to do another talk whenever part 3 news was coming up. So that, or if we get some DLC, um, which hey, you never know, could be announced at the Game Awards, right? The Game Awards, we get maybe a DLC announcement or something like that. Whenever something big happens with FF7, yeah, me, Max, and Blitz and Baby Seal will all get together and we'll do the roundtable again. So I'm very happy that you guys liked it that much. For me, it was like a dream come true because um, basically for like 5 years straight, you guys asked me to do that. Like literally 5 years straight, like from 2019 to 2024. Like you guys are like, oh my God, please collab with Maximilian Dude, please collab with Maximilian Dude, and yeah, it was great. I was glad that we could actually finally make that. Oh yeah, and Sleep Easy. I'm sorry, I forgot about Sleep Easy. I forgot about Sleep Easy. Yes, and Sleep Easy. My boy. Yes. Sleep Easy will be there. I just forgot about him. I'm a terrible friend. That's why. In fairness, it's like 5, 6 people all on one podcast. It was crazy. And I think we went for like what? We went for like 3 hours, and it was so ridiculous because even when we went for 3 hours, like all of us were still like ready to keep going. Um, I genuinely think like because like Max had to like go at that time, and it like, but even he was like, yo, if I didn't have to go right now, I probably would like be on here for like another 3 hours because we were all so locked in to that podcast. It was great. It was great. It was like the most locked in I think we all have ever been when discussing FF7. Like we were locked in the fuck in to that chat. It was so good, man. It was so good. I can't wait to fucking do it again. I can't wait to do it again. And yeah, and also too, what was great about the FF16 launch party that we had not too long ago was that during that launch party, I was actually able to meet everybody in person, right? So, I was able to meet Sleep Easy, I was able to meet Blitz and Baby Seal and Max. I was able to just like, shake hands with all these guys at that event. And I just wish there were more events like that. I guess there are in the form of like PAXs and stuff like that, but I just wish that like we could have like, I don't know. Square Enix should fly us all out for part 3. They should fly us all out and that's what they should do. We should have a Square Enix sponsored podcast about FF7 part 3. I'm throwing that out there into the universe that the Square Enix gods will be like if they did it for Rebirth. Okay, So this is one thing also too to like kind of talk about with the regards to like 16 sales versus like Rebirth sales is that one thing I don't see people pointing out is like they'll be like, well, you say Rebirth is the ideal FF game, but then 16 sold more. So then how do you kind of like reconcile that other than like, you know, it being a sequel? I'll also say that like 16 was just simply marketed better in every way. 16 was marketed better. Everything Rebirth got, 16 got that and more. 16 had the very expensive live action commercial. 16 had the very expensive launch party with a gigantic Ifrit statue and a 8 hour dude that event was like 8 hours long or something like that, 7 8 hours long, and they had like uh all the different they had all the different guests on there. They had like a lot of Pierce and like you know, they had the dev team, and then they had like all these streaming setups for us to like go and stream the game. Uh, it was very expensive and very cool. It was like the coolest event ever. I was very thankful for Square inviting me to that event because it was awesome. Um, it was very, but yeah, they did. Oh yeah, they also pay tons of streamers. Thank you, Subtext. Tons of streamers and multi with main streamers playing the demo. Right. So this is the thing too, right? They had sponsored streams with like Ludwig and like all of these really big million plus streamers that like are like the most followed streamers ever. They had sponsor streams for them to play the demo, and the demo itself was also like a really great way of marketing Final Fantasy 16. And another thing too is that FF16 simply had a better demo than Rebirth, right? FF16 had story that you didn't know where it was going to go. And that demo, the opening 2 hours of Final Fantasy 16, is probably one of the best openings to a video game ever. No offense, but the Nibelheim part sucked. Yeah, the demo for Rebirth just wasn't good. Um, Actually, I shouldn't say that because the demo itself wasn't bad. It was actually a pretty decent demo, but it like if you compare Rebirth's demo to 16's demo, 16's demo was better than Rebirth's by a mile, right? So anyone who played 16's demo would be convinced to buy the game, right? Even if they didn't end up liking what the game ended up being, it was hard to play that demo and then not be like, okay, I'm into like what they're doing, right? So I had a lot of issues with the final game of 16, but like the demo itself, that first 2 hours is like a fucking masterclass, and you'll never see me say anything otherwise about the opening of that game. Now, did I feel like personally the later portions of the game really held up to how I felt about the demo? I don't really feel that way. But the demo itself was really well done. And also too, I think the demo kind of I don't want to say misled me, but it made me think certain things were going to be in the game or that the game was going to focus on certain things that it didn't do. And so there was some natural disappointment too from the game kind of not having those things. In particular, actually, was kind of the growth system in the game because when I first saw the growth system in the demo, and there was like all the abilities in like the big circle, I thought that there would also be other stuff outside of icon abilities that you'd be able to dump points into, right? Like I thought that there would be like either stat bonuses or abilities and like that aspect of combat would like get more complex, if that makes sense. And so I thought from the demo, I kind of projected that the growth system was going to be a lot more elaborate than it ended up being. And so, as they say, I played myself um, in terms of 16's demo because the growth system in the final 16 game is what it is. Yeah. So, yeah, but like reverse demo was not the problem with reverse demo compared to 16's demo. 16's demo, anyone could sit down and like play that demo and they would be like, "Oh my God, this is cool as hell." And they'd be into it, right? The problem with reverse demo is that if you didn't know Final Fantasy VII, I don't think it was that convincing, right? Like not in the same way. And again, uh, in hindsight, I wouldn't say that Rebirth demo was bad. Like I wouldn't say that Rebirth like had like a bad demo or anything like that. I actually think it was quite cool that they also gave you like an open world slice too, like a small like world slice to like play around with. But just like the problem is like straight up like it just wasn't as good as like 16's demo. And that demo sold a lot of people. The demo for 16 had virality to it. People were going into other people's chats and they were like, play the Final Fantasy 16 demo. I always introduce like the latest Final Fantasy game to like my normie friends to like gauge their like take on it. And I showed them Final Fantasy 16's demo and they were like, this is the coolest fucking game ever, right? And they were like hooked on it. So that demo was like honestly like genuinely some of the best marketing that could have happened to that game. You also notice too that like people's opinions on 16 like very much turned around after that demo because before the demo, people let you like they it flipped. 16's demo lets you fight gods. Reverse demo turns you into a janitor with a vacuum cleaner. So stupid. Yeah, I think, and you know what too? Like you can also kind of like extrapolate that further out to. Sorry, I'm a little congested. When I talk for a long time, my sinus is just. But anyway, 16's demo also kind of like how should I say this? At 16, there's just like these insane high points, right? And I think how you feel about the game is just going to be like, is really going to be about like what sticks in your head more. Like, is the high points going to stick out more to you, or are the like really low points going to stick out more to you? Because I think the game has like a very like large quantity of both. Like it's really easy to like post like an awesome moment from 16 because there's so many awesome moments. The only problem is that there's so many moments that are not awesome in terms of like the gameplay and pacing. And yeah, I just really think that how you feel about that game is kind of determined by um like is the awesome better than the not so awesome in that game? And then that really ultimately determines how you feel about it. For me, I think the low points were just a little too low and dragged on a little too long for me. So I felt kind of went the other way on it. Rebirth, though, I think Rebirth never like Rebirth doesn't peak as hard as 16, but it's a much more consistent experience, right? Like I think at any point in time during Rebirth, I was either somewhere between 8 out of 10 to 10 out of 10 enjoying myself, right? Like I was always like having like a pretty good time, right? Um but there were moments in like 16 where I was like I'm 6 out of 10 enjoying myself. I'm 12 out of 10 enjoying myself. I'm 4 out of 10 enjoying myself. I'm 8 out of 10 enjoying myself. I'm 3 out of 10 enjoying myself. Like that's how like the experience with that game was for me. Um like it's entirely subject to like the actual moment that you're on. Yeah, I would have enjoyed it a lot more if it was shorter, for sure. Because if it was shorter, it could have really honed in on just like the moments where it was unbelievably awesome, right? Like If it just really focused on that, then like it would be so hard to like feel anything negative toward the game. But it's really just because there are just so many moments where it just ranges so wildly about how good the game. Totally true, well said. From a 12 to a 5 to an 8 to a 3. Yeah, and then back to a 12, right? And that's how like insanely like all over the place the like pacing and feel of the game was. Um and if they just made it shorter, it would have kind of fixed that a lot for me. Because then I feels like we could have just got to the awesome a lot faster. Just yeah, just don't pad out like, don't pad out the awesome. Hot take, but is 16 carried by boss fights? I mean, like if you're asking my opinion, yes. Like it is kind of carried by the boss fights for sure. Because I think anything that's not a boss is not like I'm not that engaged personally. Like whenever if I'm just on the map doing something or talking to characters or stuff like that, it's not as engaging. And like one of the things too about like a lot of the side quests was it was very stiff. A lot of the cutscene animations were incredibly stiff, and so it made it so that you had to like really hone in on what the characters were saying, and even use like your imagination a little bit because of how not animated a lot of the side content and even some of the main story quests were. Really stiff scenes. They were carried by exceptionally good voice acting, right? So you had really wonderful voice actors like Ben Starr who did a lot of the carrying in some of the technically stiff scenes where the camera wasn't moving much. There wasn't much like facial animation in the characters, and of course, a lot of the reason for that is because a lot of the budget that you'd use probably on those type of scenes probably went toward the icon fights. But that's also why in like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, right? Like you talk to an NPC for a side quest, the NPC has great animation. There's actual camera work that's happening. It doesn't feel like a quest out of like Final Fantasy 14 where it's very MMO and formulaic or anything like that. Um, so again, because Rebirth's budget is spread throughout the experience, there are very few points in Rebirth where I said this is where the budget like spread thin, and there were like very multiple, very noticeable points in Final Fantasy 16 where you're like, okay, this is where the budget, this is where they saved the budget for Bahamut, right? Um, yeah, and some of the NPC lip syncing was like kind of like wonky. And they had issues with it too in their own proprietary engine that Rebirth didn't end up having because it used Unreal Engine. And Unreal Engine's a little bit better at that. You could feel the budget go away after Bahamut, yeah. Bahamut had to be the most expensive video game boss fight in history. Excuse me. I don't know if you guys heard me belch. But Bahamut had to be the most expensive video game fight in history. Like, I don't think that anything else will like come close. I'm willing to bet that if you saw the numbers, it would be like by a good mile too. Like it was the most expensive fight. Pete costs a lot of money. It does. I think that like obviously it was well worth it, but at the same time though too, when it kind of takes away from when it kind of takes away from some of the other stuff, you do kind of have to ask, like, is that what they should do? Right? Is that like the way to keep going in terms of like the next game or the next game or even with that game? Because, again, you had to have like a lot of dry, budget friendly moments so that you could spend it on the places that really matter. Because honestly, I mean, the Bahamut fight was so cool. It was definitely the best moment in the game. I don't think anyone like really disagrees, except I mean, well, some people like the Titan fight better. Um, I liked Odin more than I like Odin more too, Somnus, because Odin was an actual boss fight that was very well designed and very cool. Whereas I felt like a lot of the other boss fights were just kind of like just too cinematic. They were cinematic to the point of where I wasn't like really playing. Whereas Odin, even though Odin is not cinematic in the same way as like, yeah, set pieces. Even though Odin's not like a set piece heavy fight in the same way that like Bahamut is, Odin is just like a really well designed fight, right? Like it's a really good fight. That's a good boss fight. I'm probably in the minority because I would have preferred more fights like Odin than fights like Titan and Bahamut. And again, I know that I'm in the minority for the so no need to ratio or beat my butt. But like, yeah, because for me, the actual playability of it kind of trumps the spectacle, right? Like I want it to actually be like not just like, oh, this is like, really cool to look at, but like actually this is like a really well designed fight. And I think when you break it down, like Odin was actually a well designed fight. I'm already tweeting your cook stream. Ooh, you're not wrong when you think about it. Okay, thank you. Subtext says what really exposed 16 was how much of a struggle it was for an MMO team to make compelling in-between content, the equivalent of dungeon. Right, because it feels like Final Fantasy 14 in a way that 14 is able to get away with easier than Final Fantasy 16. And obviously I love 14. But yeah, 16 is just I mean, 14 is able to get away with that stuff easier by virtue of being an MMO. Um, Do you think Square will be more cautious on their budget for FF17 since the sales of 16 and Rebirth weren't to their expectations? Either way, they'll invest another 100 million on a game or cut back, but risk even less players for 17. I think that they are going to go insanely hard for Final Fantasy 17 because FF17, if I'm being blunt, especially if part three of Remake trilogy doesn't really light up the charts in a big way. If it doesn't, then like I could see FF17 being like, if they don't buy this, then we're just not doing Final Fantasy in the same way anymore. That or we're like cutting back tremendously. And the latter part of that about them like cutting back and being like, we're not doing, a big FF17. We're gonna do like a smaller scale game. Maybe it'll be like turn based or something, and it'll be like 30 hours long. That could still be a possibility, even that they decide from here on out. Because, I mean, to be honest, you know, two mainline Final Fantasies should have blew up their financial reports in the best way possible. When was the last time a numbered FF felt complete like that? 13. Um, I think that 16 felt complete. Like I would not say that 16 was an incomplete feeling game, even despite its shortcomings. I don't think that 16 felt complete. I mean incomplete. I think 16 was complete. I think 13 was complete too. I think the only one I would describe as incomplete straight up is 15. 15 was not complete. There's very strong arguments that you can make both anecdotally and just like through like pure observation and breakdowns of many of the concepts of 15, that 15 was just not complete. In SP, the FF Union showed at least the biggest flaw everyone agreed on was the lack of side content for 13 or 16. I think for 16, right? Yeah, for 16. I wouldn't describe 16 as incomplete. I just would describe myself as disagreeing with like a lot of the choices made on it, but I don't think I would describe it as incomplete necessarily. It's complete. I just disagree with like a lot of the things that they chose to do design wise. But like you could argue that maybe it's incomplete because you can't play as Jill or any of the other characters, but I would just counter that by saying that like, well, you're not intended to play as those characters. That's not part of the vision, right? So it's complete for like what they aim to do. It just may not have like satisfied the desires that you may have had about like what you wanted the game to be or how it could have been, but which is also a fair argument to make like within its own right. But I think it's also like a separate argument from complete game versus incomplete game. I don't think that, but again, like, other than what happened to Final Fantasy 15, which is a very specific case, right? Like, I don't think I would describe like contemporary FF games as incomplete as being like their main problem. Even in the case of like Final Fantasy 7 Retrilogy, which is broken up into 3 games, those are still 3 complete games, I feel like. 3 very much finished, well polished games. Even if their story is not the complete story of Final Fantasy 7, I still describe those as complete games. Um, yeah, I don't think that like complete or not complete is like really, the way I would approach critiquing um, contemporary FF. For me, it's just like if I had the way to describe what I think is wrong with contemporary FF, is just that like, and this is excluding the retrilogy because I think that they did get it there. But I think that like it's not going hard enough on the RPG side of things in terms of gameplay. If we're strictly talking about gameplay, they just haven't been going hard enough on like the RPG ness of the past few games. Um, that namely 13, 15, 16, I feel like could lean heavier into the role playing game aspects. Um, and particularly with 15 and 16, they really did not lean hard into those role playing game aspects whatsoever, right? 16 is definitely a hack and slash first, and it has light RPG elements. It does feel like with 16 they first decided that like this is the hack and slash Final Fantasy. Now how can we put some RPG elements in here retroactively in order to not anger our RPG audience, right? So they were like, okay, well you can still level up, you can still craft a new sword. There's still a couple of accessories and stuff like that. But this is still the hack and slash action RPG that we wanted it to be, right? That's what it feels like they did with Final Fantasy 16. It was not like it does not feel like they set out to be like, we are making an action RPG hybrid and we want this game to be equal parts action and RPG. They really did set out to make this um, an action game first, and then just said, yeah, we want some RPG stuff in there for the RPG fans of FF, right? And yeah, I do think that the game probably would have ended up resonating stronger with some if it did kind of lean into one more than the other in a clear way, right? Because I do think that most of the criticism of the game is just born from the fact that people just didn't feel like it was RPG enough. Robert Smith, thank you for the super chat. Just give us a hybrid turn based with action elements. Robert, what I've really come to in like listening to all the community feedback is that I think players want a character that moves around like Clive, but has an ATB bar like Cloud, right? They want a character that can do Clive's perfect dodges and his jump cancels and stuff like that. But then they want to be able to pop open a command menu and choose attacks from a command menu and unleash those. Like they want to be able to like, be in the air and do crazy shit like Clive does, but they want to be able to do that with the ATB strategy that 7R does. And I think that's what people mean when they say they want to combine them. It's ironic that they toned down the RPG mechanics as RPG mechanics and invaded other genres and removed world maps as open world games became popular. Yeah. Yeah. It's, subtext. First of all, subtext, I don't know if I said thank you for the super, but thank you, bro, for the super chat. Um, because you're so right. Because as other games became popular, for like RPG mechanics, like basically every game is becoming more RPG right now, right? Like first person shooters are more RPG. Um Zelda. Zelda's more RPG now than ever. The open air style, like before you could argue that Zelda games are like purely action adventure games, but there is an argument that you could make, not necessarily saying that Zelda is an RPG, but Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, you could definitely say that if you like RPGs, you'd probably like those games because those games are packed full of RPG elements. Almost undeniably, like undeniably, you could say those games are packed full of RPG elements. And if you like RPGs, you might actually like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom on that virtue. God of War Ragnarok, very RPG, like surprisingly RPG. IGN got in trouble for making an article saying that God of War is more RPG than Final Fantasy 16, and people hated that, but that's actually not untrue. Like there's more RPG mechanics, like growth mechanics, there's skill trees, there's crafting, there's all these other things that are actually deeper and have more like there's actual builds in God of War now, right? Like different shields and stuff you can use. Um, like levels of customization actually that you don't get in Final Fantasy 16 is there in God of War Ragnarok, which is very surprising. Baldur's Gate 3 being successful, which Baldur's Gate 3 is the most hardcore role-playing game like you can imagine. Game of the year. So it seems to me that the industry itself is going harder and harder RPG. Every game of all genres, even if they don't explicitly label themselves as an RPG, has been going kind of RPG, right? Arguably to the point of where you could consider them on some level a role-playing game, right? So it just seems strange to me that Square Enix's motto for like the past few games, or Square Enix's approach for the past few games, has been to dial back the RPG, right? Because starting with Final Fantasy 13, I don't know if you guys remember this, but FF13 only has three stats: HP, magic, and attack. Those are the only three stats in Final Fantasy 13. That was when they began to kind of dial back like the role playing customization, right? 15, it had some role playing stuff in it, but it wasn't really that hardcore. Not much more than any other open world action RPG. It was very surface level, get better stats for stuff, get better gear. It wasn't really that deep, honestly. It wasn't like you were changing out new attacks or new abilities. Uh, it was kind of the same ish throughout. It was as basic as it possibly could be. It was not that deep. And then Final Fantasy 16 kind of like went even further than that, where most of the stats honestly don't matter that much. And aside from that, they auto level anyway. So, um, as the rest of the industry has become more in pursuit of having RPG elements and these types of deep customization elements within their game, it feels like Final Fantasy has dialed back from that. And I think that that's a huge mistake. They tried to become more mainstream while mainstream games became more Final Fantasy. That is such a great way of putting it, Subtext. That's like exactly it. It feels like other games are trying to become more Final Fantasy and Final Fantasy is trying to become less Final Fantasy. And I think that that's like a terribly huge mistake, right? Like, I think that like the best thing that could ever happen to like Final Fantasy 17 is if like the game's media like almost describes Final Fantasy 17 as so unapologetically Final Fantasy JRPG that they're almost using it like a smear, like to like smear the game. Like they're almost like, ugh, it's so Final Fantasy. Ugh, it's so like I actually think that that's like kind of the right dial back for FF17. Not to the point of where it's like cringe weeb like game, you know what I'm saying? But just to the point of where it's like this is an RPG, this is a role-playing game from Japan, and yeah, we make role-playing games from Japan, and this is the type of games that people want, and we make those types of games. And that's exactly what our latest game, Final Fantasy 17, is. That's what I want to see, man. If Velgard sells well, that'll be proof with iterating from previous games versus from scratch pays off. Velgard also, they said, drew inspiration from Final Fantasy VII Remake, which is really interesting, right? Because it's so funny. Because even Final Fantasy games like are like too afraid to like draw inspiration from themselves now. Like Final Fantasy won't even draw inspiration from its own self. And other developers are out here being like, yeah, we looked at Final Fantasy, we thought that was cool, and we put it in the game. Set in feudal Japan, of course. No, dude, I actually think that like instead of doing like, because I don't know if they can get away with stylized graphics fully, because I don't know if that's the right move. I do think the iconic look of FF, as we think of it, that was kind of set through like Final Fantasy 8 and 10 moving forward. I think that should like kind of stay the look of FF, like the anime realism hybrid. But I think like the way to like really Japan pill Final Fantasy 17, I do think it is to take it to like to feudal Japan or something like that. And I've talked about this before, but take it to feudal Japan, give the main character a katana gunblade, and make it so that in order to parry, you have to do like the Bloodborne parry, right? So you use the gun, you have to use the gun blade, and right before the enemy attacks, you have to shoot the gun blade and cause an explosion to throw the enemy off balance. That's how I would make Final Fantasy 17's parry system work, right? So if it used like a 7R like battle system, right? So you parry the enemy, and if you parry the enemy and you pull the trigger to do the gunblade right as the enemy is about to attack, right? So the explosion throws the enemy off balance. And when you do that, you get 2 full ATB bars immediately from parrying. And then you're able to follow that up with like a punishing attack. You're able to like immediately pull into the command menu. So like Sekiro, Bloodborne, and Final Fantasy VII Remake combined. That's basically the way I would be. That's how I would be designing it if I was like, someone clip this and send it to Square Enix, please. Maybe I'll tweet about it, but I feel like FF16 Twitter would like just be angry at me saying that for some reason. I feel like they would just hate me saying it. I don't know why. I feel like they would just not like me saying it because some of them didn't like me saying that, like building off of like 7R. But that's how I would do it. Because a lot of people when I said that like shooting the gun blade, some people said like I should work like the magic blast and like or magic burst in like 16, but I was like, no, I wouldn't want it to work like magic burst, right? Because with magic burst, you kind of just mash it. You kind of just mash it. It's not it's not that special, right? Like I feel like whenever you pull the trigger for the gun blade, it needs to be special. Like it needs to be like, oh my God, that's the coolest fucking shit ever, right? So I actually don't feel like the gunblade should just be something that you're just firing like willy-nilly. Like I don't think it should just be something that's like shooting out like every few seconds. I think whenever you use the gunblade, it should have like a very precise timing mechanic to it. Chrome Lock, thank you for the raid. Welcome. Whenever you use that mechanic, it should it should be really important. Like the gunblade should be like so important and so cool. And I can't think of a better way to implement it than to do Bloodborne like parries with it. Like the enemy is about to attack, pull the trigger, it causes because remember the lore of the gunblade, right? It's not that you shoot the enemies with it, it's that it causes a vibrant like a really vibrant shockwave that like does more damage, right? So that would play like directly into like the parry. Like that would make perfect sense because right as you know, like imagine like a big enemy, right? He's got like an axe or something or a big heavy sword. He's right about to just like to attack you, and if you pull the trigger on the gun blade, that shockwave will explode and send them back kind of the other way, right? So this is making sense, and then that's where you could do like imagine I don't know doing braver with like a katana or something. I'm just trying to illustrate it in your head. Um, so that's how I think that that should work. People would go crazy on that shit, man. People would fucking love that. And I would also I know a lot of people would hate this, but I'd probably even slow the ATB gauge down even further and make it like a lot more skill based. So that thing basically isn't charging and like unless you're doing like perfect dodges and stuff or you're doing like hits. Like you have to build that meter up. Like there is no like coasting to the side and like it's also how I would make the action mechanics of 7R better because a lot of the action mechanics are kind of clunky and kind of predicated on you taking damage. If they nerf ATB generation, they have to change buffs and debuffs. Single target buffs are already awful in Rebirth. Yeah. Yeah, they'd have to play with it a lot. But see that's the fun of Final Fantasy, right? It was playing with that established system and then being like, what can we do and take this thing and like do a different thing with it and like it'd be so cool and so much fun, even though it's actually the same, but then it's actually not the same. Like that was always like a really fun, sick thing, right? I don't know about you guys, but I thought the way they would change up the Final Fantasy games before were always just so cool. Even though they were working within a framework, it was like it was never boring. It was never uninteresting. At least I thought, like, I always thought it was like really cool. Um, like. Would you like FF17 to be large zones like 16 or more large open world like Rebirth or corridors like 13? I think there should be a world map like Rebirth. I think when I experienced Rebirth's world map, I was like, this is what we're I was like, this is what we're supposed to be doing, right? I think that Rebirth's world map is the way forward. I don't think that necessarily each game needs to be as big as Rebirth. I think Rebirth was a little too big and had a little too much going on. However, I do think that having a map like that, like a world map, and being able to fly across it. Remember, guys, in part 3, we're going to have an airship. And guess what? The code for the airship is already implemented. Why not use that on Final Fantasy 17? Why not have FF17 revolve around you having an airship and flying around these massive zones? Okay, listen, we talk about like Final Fantasy and standing out like among the market, right? What could possibly make FF17 stand out more than saying, okay, Final Fantasy games are returning the airship. And not only are they turning the airship, the game is going to focus around airship gameplay. And you're going to be flying an airship around this open world. I mean, that is an expensive game to make. It's also why reutilizing stuff is so important here. But that's going to make it stand out, right? Like if you show people that this is the RPG with the airship in it and you can fly the airship across the map, you know, like in the Final Fantasy game. Dude, that's going to work. That's going to work. People are going to be into that. People are going to be really into that. Imagine you can skydive like in Tears of the Kingdom. They already added parachutes in Remake. I mean, Tears of the Kingdom's like world map or like Tears of the Kingdom's open world is already like kind of suited for like an airship. Like you could technically put an airship in Tears of the Kingdom if you wanted to. Right? I think that some people have actually like built that in the game. Like they've actually like made that. So, uh yeah, I could see it happening. Yeah, you can build one in the game, right? So, um anyway, that's what I think they should do. I think I think you should have a an airship. I do. I know an airship is not easy to implement, but the fact that they're doing it in part 3, the fact that they're figuring it out now, an airship is going to make the game stand out. 100%. Like 100 trillion%. I feel very strongly about it. Um, are you okay with the smaller version of you on the world map again? I don't think they'll do it purely because it's not very AAA savvy, PS5 savvy to do. I don't think they'll do that. I think if there's a world map again, it'll be like Rebirth's world map. I mean, even Nomada has said that the world map disappearing for Final Fantasy was not like a good move. And I agree with him. Nomada was right. Final Fantasy should have a world map. Even if it's a linear game, they should figure out how to make a world map in there. And even if it is like a big guy walking across a small map. Airship will get rid of the towers, new way to discover points of interest. Yeah. I mean, imagine like FF17's a 40-hour game, right? The first 20 hours, you're on foot, and then the last 20 hours, you're in the air. And then you're discovering new points of interest by flying around. Using all the tech that they built for Final Fantasy VII. It's the most requested feature, I believe, to ever uh like every time people are like, are there going to be airships? And there's just a tremendous amount of disappointment every single time. Every time that you tell people, fans, there won't be airships, there won't be a world map, they check out. Like a large number of people do. Like I've noticed this from making content. Like, you know, so these have been my observations. Okay. So I think we'll go ahead and call it a stream today. If you're on Twitch, we'll just rate a friend of mine. And if you're on YouTube, listen carefully. If you're on YouTube, make sure that you go and look for this state of play stream for tomorrow, and be sure to hit the notification bell so that you will know when I go live. Okay? Make sure you do that if you are on YouTube. Okay? All right. I love you guys. I'll see you all tomorrow for the Sony